Good morning and a very warm welcome to everyone who has joined us. We are so pleased to welcome you to our second Women in Risk Leadership Summit. Very warm in Johannesburg today, sunshine and blue skies, and I hope that wherever you are, you're having some great weather. We have a really power-packed program this morning. Some things that you can look forward to in this program is hearing from our fantastic speakers, dynamic trailblazers, who are going to talk to us this morning around a few topics like Dear Younger Me, lessons from a CEO, building towards a future world, leading in diversity, how to step up as a risk function. And you can see on my screen, we've, our theme for the year is step up. So that fits really well with our theme. And then the secondary pandemic, the crisis of gender-based violence, and then innovation, exploration-driven innovation. We are really pleased to have you join us this morning. Just a few house rules before we get going. You will note that the host has muted your microphones and your cameras, but please, we really love to engage with you. On the platform, you will see, depending on your software, you will see your chat function either at the bottom of your screen or to the right of your screen. Our team is already engaging with you, so please feel free to engage with us on the chat function. You can post your questions to the speakers in the chat function and really just tell us how you're feeling, give us your comments. We'd love to engage with you. So I hope you have your coffee ready and you are ready for this morning. And we are excited to be with you. What's happening in the life of IRMSA? Always some exciting things happening. Members, you would have already got some great emails and wondering what it is that we're launching with our hybrid training model. We are really excited for this next big phase of training solution where we've heard the needs of our members and be able to meet your needs. I think we're all suffering from a little bit of online fatigue. And so how can we bring you some innovation? And so on the 27th of August, Risk, Appetite and Tolerance will be our first hybrid training solution where we're really just merging the online attendee with an in-classroom attendee in a very fun, interactive way in a virtual sort of space with technology. And so we're really excited to bring you this solution. So reach out to us to hear more about our hybrid training. And then our much anticipated risk event of the year, our annual conference, is coming up in September on the 29th and 30th of September with our masterclass on the 1st of October. We are really excited to do our second completely virtual conference, and we have some really great innovation that we are excited to share with you. So follow us on our social media platforms, our online platforms, our YouTube channel, and keep up to date with what's happening with our annual conference coming up. Before we get going, we are very fortunate and grateful to have a partner on board with us today. LexisNexis has partnered with us to host this second Women in Risk Summit. And so we are really grateful to LexisNexis. So thank you, LexisNexis, for partnering with us on this session. And then further, LexisNexis has also partnered with IRMSA to support us in ensuring that as a professional body, we are compliant in terms of our POPIA legislation and our compliance. And so thank you, LexisNexis, for providing us with solutions and software that ensures that we are actually leading in our compliance space. And without further ado, to kick off this morning, it is my great privilege and honor to introduce to you our trailblazer, our leader, our IRMSA CEO, Pat Semenya. So Pat, over to you.
Thank you, Val, for such a warm welcome. Good morning, everybody. I am so thrilled to have you join the IRMSA Institute of Risk Management South Africa Women in Risk and Leadership Summit. This is specifically to commemorate Women's Month, a month of celebration for the economic, political, and social achievements of women past, present, and future. We honor the women of the past, those who stood for the change and fought for the rights that we live and enjoy today. The IRMSA annual risk, as indicated by Val before, is Step Up, Now is the Time, which calls for our members to be responsible, bold, brave, and to take action. I find this to be also relevant to the tribute that we're trying to commemorate today, where more than 20,000 women marched to the Union buildings on the 9th of August in 1956 in protest against the extension of the pass law to women. Today, we are gathered in spirit to celebrate the women in our lives who use their voice to help make our world a better place for women. They are the cornerstones of our communities. They work tirelessly and effortlessly, making countless differences in the lives of those around them. Today, we honor women of the future, those who will continue to be champions and a champion of women's voices, to break barriers and keep visible women's achievements and prides. In the words of Melinda Gates, a woman with a voice is a strong woman. However, to build that voice is remarkably difficult, and we will find that out today. This morning, we are privileged to have 6 strong leaders who will take us on a journey of self-discovery, rebuilding, and leading fearlessly with purpose. I would now like to invite our opening speaker, Ms. Vidisha Pruthridget, the CEO and chairperson of the board LexisNexis South Africa. Vidisha has demonstrated to be a practicing servant leadership throughout her career, enriching the lives of many individuals and contributing in building better organizations. Her message today is hinged on lessons from the CEO addressing her younger selves. On that note, I'll hand over to Vidisha. Thank you.
Good morning, everybody. Thank you, Pat, for that wonderful introduction. Can you hear me? I think that's the thing, that's the saying for the last 2 years, right? Can you hear me? No one said it more than ever before. So thank you for having me. What an absolute honor to be here. And thank you for the partnership. I was saying to Val earlier, you know, we always gravitate towards companies and people who share the same vision that we do. And so partnering with IRMSA has been, you know, almost a marriage made in heaven, which, as we all know, those are quite difficult to find. So thank you for the partnership. And also thank you for having me. It is such a pleasure and such an honor. I was thinking about this, you know, in terms of, does one write a very long speech and, you know, talk about a lot of jargon, etc. And I thought, I don't always get the opportunity to just be myself and to just share from my heart. So for those of you that know me, you'll know that I've grown over the years and I've become quite unashamedly me. And so that's what I'm going to do today. I'm going to talk about the lessons and also the opportunities that I have had in life and how I have traversed them. And I really think that, you know, we all don't have enough time in terms of years lived to make all the mistakes that are possible. So if nothing else, my sharing with you is to help you use your time more wisely, and hopefully there's something that serves you. And so please feel free to steal it and use it. And if it doesn't, feel free to leave it behind. I always say that being present is very important because this moment will never come again. And it is really pregnant with possibility. But if we must look back, I think what I have learned is to look back with love, with forgiveness, with joy, and with gentleness, and with the intention to share something that will hopefully be value. I do strive to be of value in life. And so creating value is very important to me. Executing on value, delivering value is something that really speaks to me. And so I was thinking, I was reading a book. It was called Women Who Run with Wolves. And I loved one of the quotes. It said, if you have never been called a defiant, incorrigible, and impossible woman, have faith. There is still time. And so I think for me, the one of the things I want to say to dear younger me is, I'm quite proud to say that I have been called these adjectives and many more like them because of the way that I have decided to challenge the status quo. It has been an intentional choice. I stepped up, in my life. And so I wear these adjectives as a badge of honor. I don't look at them as being, something negative. I choose to challenge the traditional thinking, the paradigms that exist. I have refused to blend into the crowd. I chose to stand out and be counted. I have chosen to be brave and bold in the face of adversity. And I have demanded what is right for me and for us. And so sometimes it's a lonely path, charting new possibilities. However, I have had most fun for the most part of it. And so, dear younger self, I have lived a life that has been filled with purpose and meaning. And I have loved just about every single moment of it. So know that thus far, and I say thus far, dear younger me, for there is still much more living to be done. Thus far, we should be proud of ourselves, for we have not just survived, we have thrived. An important caveat for me is to remind you that I am not the CEO. I am not the mother of my children. I am not just a daughter or a sister or an aunt or a mentor. I am Vidisha. I am me. And so all of these different roles and titles that exist around me is what makes up me. And so I often get, asked, how different are you when you're in the workplace versus when you're at home? And I always say that must be quite stressful to be different people in different environments. So for me, integrity has been very important, and having alignment in terms of what I say, the words that I use, my beliefs and my value system, and then the actions that come from it is really important, whether I am in the workplace or doing other things in my life. So today, when I talk about my lessons, some of them are specific to being a CEO and a leader. Some are specific to being a mom. Some are specific to being a coach and a mentor. But really, I am the sum of all the experiences that I've had in my life. I am not good at being boxed, and I will not be defined by a title. So good or bad, these are the experiences of Vidisha. And so I wanted to share some of the lessons with my younger self, but also with you guys. And I think some of them would have made my journey a lot smoother had I learned them earlier in life. My first one is know your why. I think when I was younger, I really spent a lot of time just flitting from this job to that job and not really knowing why I was doing it and what was my purpose. What was it that gives me meaning? What is it that really brings joy in all areas of my life, not just from a corporate perspective? And so it has taken me a while to understand that I am an uplifter of humanity. The things that make me really excited is when I inspire and help others reach their full potential. And so for me, working on the plight of women and the girl child, making sure that we advance the rule of law to create equitable societies and give free access to all opportunities is really important because it speaks to my why. And I have learned that leaving the world a better place than I found it is important to me. So that is my why. I think it is important that we all sit down and have very honest conversations with ourselves, because once you know your why, I believe the how becomes much easier. I've also learned to be honest with myself, which is quite a difficult thing to do. We all put out there many faces of ourselves, but taking time to sit down and be with yourself is quite a scary thing sometimes. And so I've also learned that giving constructive feedback is very easy, but receiving feedback makes you vulnerable. But at the same time, it is an absolute gift. And so I have learned to solicit feedback from the people around me. And I honor the gift of feedback, because feedback is a gift, by taking that feedback and implementing it into my lives. And sometimes, guys, life will throw you a curveball. And I do believe, I mean, in the words of Viktor Frankl, between stimulus and response, there is a space. And in that space is our power to choose. And in that response that we choose to give lies our growth and our freedom. So intentionally choosing to respond and not react is where our power lies. And I've also learned that out of that, contrast is not always a bad thing. It's actually a great thing. When you have to go through trials and tribulations, it really is key to understanding what you don't want in life. And then it gives you a very deep understanding of what you do want and what you are willing to accept and what you are not willing to accept. So it is time to unearth your why and then live your best life. One of my other lessons is to be selfish. I think it is one of the best compliments I have ever received. When I was told, oh, you're so selfish, you only think about your happiness. And initially, there was a lot of guilt that came with it. But when I thought about it, and I do believe that you cannot pour from an empty cup. So you have to feed yourself. You have to feed your body, your mind. Sometimes I feed the body too much, but you have to feed your body, your mind, and your soul in ways that really nourishes you and lets you be the best you that you can be. And really, I think it is quite arrogant of us to always say, oh, I'll do it tomorrow, because you assume that tomorrow will come. There are many that tomorrow did not come for. So make sure you take the time, put the time aside for yourself. And stretching yourself is really important, yes, but don't stretch yourself to the point where you break. Know your limits. And so make sure your cup runs over, and make sure that you surround yourself by people who really inspire you to be better. Also be aware of your inner dialogue. We say be self-aware. What does that really mean? I have found that in many instances in my life, I've not been aware of the inner talk, the inner dialogue that goes on, that really ends up not helping me grow as a human being. So check that inner dialogue. We all know the story of Ben, who has 5 of the 8 skill sets that are required for a new vacancy. And then there's Susan, who has 7.5 of the 8 plus an additional 3. But Susan's inner dialogue is about how I don't have that 0.5 skill set. I'm not worthy of this role. I'm setting myself up for failure. It's easier to be, safe. And so Susan does not apply for the role, and Ben gets the job. And then everybody tells Susan, well, you were the best fit for this job. Why did you not apply? And so I always say, guys, nobody needs enemies when you are your own worst saboteur. So make sure that you're aware of that inner dialogue. Check it. Speak to yourself kindly. Use good words, positive words. Inspire yourself. Be your own fan club. Think intentionally. Think loving thoughts. And most importantly, love yourself, because you, more than anyone else, should be a beneficiary of the love that we as women generally so easily give to others. I've also learned that failure is a greater teacher than success. But it's important to fail fast and to fail forward. When we fail, it's okay to have a down day, take a day or two to cry on the shoulder of somebody that wants to listen, but then pick yourself up, get back on that horse and get going. Failure is definitely a stepping stone to success. And sometimes failure and rejection is actually a blessing in disguise. I remember when I was the head of the South African operations of a multinational. And, I was next in line to be the head of Africa. It was the natural progression. I'd done the stretch assignments. I understood what was required. And so when the vacancy was released, everybody knew this was Vidisha's next role. And lo and behold, my horror and surprise when I learned from my then manager that, they had decided to bring somebody in from HQ rather, because he needed field experience to become a VP. And the worst thing was, when I said, this is not fair, she said, yes, this is not fair, Vidisha. It is what it is. And so once again, that was an opportunity for me to look at how I responded. Between that stimulus and my response was a space for me to think about how I was going to react. And I could have left, but this was my baby. I had grown Africa. And so for me, it was important to see it through. And so I decided I was going to put my head down and do my work as I always did. And then 6 months later, there was new leadership, there was a reorganization that happened, and that role, the Africa head, became redundant. And my role, which was the head of Africa, stayed because it had the required criteria to stay. And so that rejection at the time was not a pleasant thing, but in hindsight, it was a blessing in disguise. And so I have learned that really what is meant for you will come to you when you are ready and when the timing is right. One of my other lessons in life has been around titles versus skill sets. For as long as I can remember, since I entered the corporate world, I dreamt of being the MD, the person at the top of that ladder, the one that, gets to be the face of a company. And so when I got there, I expected fireworks, to come out of the skies. I expected etheric trumpets to play and for there to be orchestral music in the background. And yet it was just another day in the life of many people. Yes, for me, it was a special one. But, I learned that getting to the top, having the title, whether it's in the middle, in the junior, at the top of an organization, it's just a title. The work carries on, and that's what defines you, is your work and how you deliver. And so collecting titles is not important. Collecting skill sets is. So what I have learned is to spend my time, which is quite precious, really understanding the skill sets that are required in order for me to be able to grow, be it as a human being, be it as a CEO, be it as a mom, etc. And then really fine-tuning and bringing those skill sets into my bag of tricks and tips. And so skill sets for me is really about building longevity. We all know that a title can disappear overnight, and that is the reality. But skill sets have longevity, and they add to your balance sheet. So I also warn myself to be aware of the arrogance that sometimes seeps in when you get a title, and this is where being self-aware is important. It's where you need to be aware of your biasness. You need to be aware of your conditioning, and you have to be open to diversity. And this is where surrounding yourself with a team that is better than you is key. So I always say building a bench that is enviable is important, because having diverse opinions and views, having people that call you out on your bullshit, on your biasness, on doing things the old way, on making, defending the status quo, is very important, because that is what grows organizations, and that is what helps you grow as a human being as well. And so be aware that when you become the head of something new, whether it's a head of a department, the CEO, a coach, etc., what got you there is not what is going to keep you there. You have to be willing to evolve. And part of that evolution is bringing in diverse aspects. Diversity is really a competitive advantage that we must all learn to use for our growth. And so some of the other things that I think is really important is the work-life balance. Guys, shall we talk about that for a moment? Work-life balance is an interesting myth. I always say I am a masterpiece in progress, but there is no work me and life me. Like I said before, I am a holistic human being. And so I have learned to, it really depends on the phase that you are at in your life. And sometimes one element suffers at the hands of another. Sometimes family takes center stage. I once had to, I'd love to share with you, I was asked to speak on the disappearing woman syndrome in corporate, where, many women, when they reach middle to senior management, tend to disappear out of the corporate system. And I laughed at that description, like the disappearing woman syndrome. And I said, it's not that we disappear, it's that we go focus on other things that are more important to us, be it relationships, be it family, be it adventure, climbing Mount Peru, whatever it is that calls to us. So, sometimes other things take priority. Your mental well-being really has to take priority at certain times in your life, and that's perfectly okay. Sometimes I'm an amazing mom, an amazing CEO, an amazing mentor, an amazing sister, and sometimes I drop balls. And that's okay, because I'm not Wonder Woman. And it's okay to not be Superwoman. Though I must say, I can rock a boardroom in high heels and with much sass. But really, ladies and men, I think one of the important things is to let go of the guilt. I learned pretty early in my career what makes me happy. And so I've learned to contract with the people in my life, be it the executive team around me or my family, to say, this is what it takes for Vidisha to be happy. And so as a family, for example, we enjoy a certain standard of living. And so I've had to explain to my family that in order for us to have a certain standard of living, I need to work X hours of the day. There are other options. We could downgrade our standard of living. We could, move into a different geographic location, and we have a conversation. And so, I always say to my kids, I could stay at home and homeschool you. And the horror in their faces is just evident. And they're very happy to say, no, mom, please go off and make sure we have you bring in some gainful opportunities into life. So contracting with your stakeholders is very important. I'd say to my manager, one of the things that's really important to me as I've grown older is to be present when it is my kid's birthday. I had an amazing manager, and I say that quite sarcastically, a few years ago, where he was from the US. And so he would decide, one of my kids are born in December, and he would decide that was the best time for him to bring his family out on a vacation to Africa. And so, I would have to go traipsing off into the wilderness of Africa with him on the pretense of having business reviews, etc. And I missed many a birthday. And, I made a choice at some point to say, this is a non-negotiable. So I always say to my stakeholders, these are my non-negotiables. These are the things that's important to me. And so we need to work around them as far as possible. And so, for me, it's really important to communicate with your team, with your managers, with your family, in terms of what's important to you, and also how, we all have the constraint of time. So you have to decide what is the best use of time. And so, guys, work-life balance is an interesting concept. You can strive to have balance in your life, in different elements of your life, at different times of your life. But, that's when life throws you those curveballs, and you have to be willing to deal with it, I guess. The other thing, I guess, is also about self-awareness and knowing yourself. Like I said, having integrity is very important, and understanding who you are. when I was first made a manager, I was pretty young. I was 24 years old. And I didn't know how to do this. And so I looked around me and I looked at the people who I thought were successful managers. And I thought, well, let's emulate those behaviors. And so I became one of those managers that was so driven. I would not take no for an answer. I drove for results. And one evening, one of the head of our core infrastructure group at that time said to me, "Oh, you're doing so well. People are so scared of you. The minute you say, this is Vidisha's project, they like jump onto it." And he said, "Well done. This is commanding respect." And I smiled and I went home and I cried. And I cried a lot because this was not me. I was being someone else in the workplace, and I was somebody else as Vidisha. And so this is where I learned the joy and the benefit of having mentors and coaches, because I went to my mentor with this dilemma, and she looked at me and she smiled and she said, "Okay, it's time to teach you about situational leadership." And this was such an amazing skill set for me, where I learned that there are situations where you have to have critical discussions, where you have to have difficult discussions, but that doesn't mean that that is where you need to live all of the time. And so I learned how to quite easily step into and out of situations and really have situational leadership as an art that was really, really beneficial to me. And so having mentors is really important. Finding those, guys, having role models is really important. And also, if you can, being a role model is important. So find those people that inspire you. And there isn't one role model that is going to inspire you in every aspect of your life. There are many leaders that are great at business, but not great at life. And so I found that I need to have different role models that inspire me in different areas of my life. And at the same time, I've learned that people need to see themselves reflected in the success of others. So it is important to have people that look like us, that think like us, that have the same challenges that we have. And then you become relatable. So it's important to look for role models, and it's important to be a role model as well. And then, guys, for me, leadership is not about a title. Leadership is about a behaviors. And leadership is a privilege. It is an honor to be given the opportunity to take care of a team and to help them grow to their full potential. And I always say we stand on the shoulders of giants that came before us, especially as women, especially for those marginalized societies, especially for those groups that have never been able to be heard before. We really stand on the shoulders of so many giants that came before us, people who stood up for our rights, people who, walked the streets and made sure that they were fighting for justice, and people who even gave their lives so that our generation can enjoy a place in the boardroom, so that our generation can have a voice at the dinner table. And so I think it is really important for us to use the platforms that we are given to create sustainable change and to create even more opportunity for our next generation. So being a voice for the voiceless is important. Challenging the status quo is important. Taking the path less trodden is important. And more important, forging new paths is very important. But most importantly, it is the duty of those of us that are given the platform to be able to impact change. And so one of my big lessons on leadership is to never come from a place of fear, never to lead from a place of fear, always lead from a place of love. And that always gives me the best results. And one of the things that I think about is rather cliche, but it's actually true, guys. do what you love and you will never work a day in your life. And I do believe that work is love made visible. And when I say work, that is working at all the different roles that you have, right? Mom, CEO, mentor, tutor, etc., etc. It's important. And it's important to put your heart in everything that you do. So knowing your why is important, but if you're not going to put your heart and soul into something, really don't do it. Don't waste your time and don't waste the time of others. And tapping into genius is really simple in theory, but it takes practice. It comes from mastering the activities that you really love. When I am hard at work with something that I love, time disappears. Everything disappears. I'm in the zone. I feel it. I feel it really deeply. You know, I always say I'm in my Zen space and I can work for hours and I do not feel it, not in my body, not in my mind. You know, I am producing the best work possible when I am in that Zen space. And so for me, it's important that I create the space to be able to have those Zen moments. And it's also important to make sure that I spend a lot of time at the workplace. It is important to me to ensure that when I am there, I am happy. And yes, I do have the luxury now of, you know, sitting in an environment where I probably get to set up an environment where I can thrive. But I've also climbed the ladder. I've had to sit in many spaces where, you know, I had to accept contrast. I've sat in many spaces where I've had to make decisions. And looking back, I think one of the things that is important is doing what you love and making sure that you're happy in doing that in the workplace every single day. And trust me, once you find your Zen, I mean, I always say I'd work for free because I love what I'm doing, but I think I say that because I know it will not be a reality, guys. But really, that is the feeling. I would do what I do every day for free because it gives me fulfillment. It gives me a sense of purpose. And so that is really, really important. The other thing is growth never happens in a comfort zone. And so you have to stretch yourself. You have to be courageous if you want to really experience life at its zenith. And learn to say yes more than you say no. Say yes. Grab opportunities that speak to your heart and your soul. You know, like IRMSA was saying earlier, step up, show up, take that seat at the table. And experiments are really necessary, guys. These are the experiences that create growth and new possibilities for all of us. So I give you an example. I once was successful in an EMEA role. So, you know, the Europe, Middle East, and Africa role. And it was a big move for me. But unfortunately, due to personal circumstances at that time, I was unable to relocate. And one of the criteria was I had to be located somewhere in the European part of the world. And so, you know, I remember saying to one of my mentors, oh, I'm really sad because I'm going to have to turn this opportunity down. And she said to me, but why? And I said, well, you know, I can't relocate. And she said, well, then ask them how you make it possible within the boundaries that you have. And, you know, I'd never thought of that. My first instinct was to say, thank you, but no, thank you. So I went to the table with solutions and options that were different. And yes, I had to sacrifice. I had to travel. I agreed to take the role and do it from South Africa, but that meant I had to travel, which meant I had to sacrifice time with my family. But it was important for me to still be here on this continent. And so I made it possible. You know, so it's very important to ask how, not just to say no. How do we make this possible? And in doing so, you know, I think I created many opportunities for many other people that were bound to a geography because I was able to deliver what was required. And so this company became much more amiable to having leaders, you know, based all over the world versus having to be in a certain geography. So, you know, sometimes when you're brave, you open up new paths for people that never existed before. One of the other lessons, guys, is to be curious. be infinitely curious, ask why and why and why and why. And the universe will yield its secrets to those who demand to know. Have an insatiable appetite for lifelong learning. There is always somebody that knows more than you. There is always something to be learned. So be humble and make sure that you spend your time wisely. The other thing is that there is always a place and a purpose for everything under the sun, including you. Being different is not a liability. Being different is an asset. Make sure that you use your uniqueness to put your stamp on the world and make it a better place for those that come after you. I was born in an Indian township, and many of my friends had the same dream. It was to marry the guy next door, have 2.5 children, and live happily ever after. And not to knock that dream. It is a great dream for those who dream it, but that was not my dream. My dream was to really go out there. I wanted to see the world. I wanted to meet people. I wanted to experience cultures that were new. I wanted to learn new things. I wanted to leave a legacy. And so I dreamt big, and I dreamt in like 5D, guys. And I coupled that with hard work, perseverance, etc. And my dreams came true. And so it's important to set big dreams for yourself. If your dreams are dreams that you can easily see achievable, then you're not fulfilling your full potential. So dream big and don't apologize for figuring out your own self. You don't have to be like everyone else. You have your own place in the world, and so claim it, and you are worth every single second. Claim your space in an unashamed manner, and make sure that, you're stretching yourself. And in doing so, you will create spaces for other people who are different too. And I guess, guys, some of the other things, Val, please let me know, because, I can go on and on and on forever. But cultivating an attitude of gratitude is key to success. Gratitude helps in so many ways. I have a daily routine. When I wake up in the morning, I think of 3 things that I'm really grateful for. And it can be something really simple, like, oh, what a wonderful pillow this is, to big things, like I am so grateful for the fact that I have a job that is fulfilling, and it can be everything else in between. But I think of a few things that I'm grateful for, and when I go to bed at night, I do the same. And I found that this is really magic. It almost forces me to put myself in a space of positivity and in a space of appreciation. And I have really found that being grateful brings abundance to me in many ways. And so there are many other things, but Val is informing me that I'm running out of time. So let me summarize. Let me end with, never be afraid to ask for help. Asking for help is a strength. Being able to ask for help is a strength. Being vulnerable is a strength. And be willing to receive help. Be willing to receive compliments, accept them, own them, for they are yours. And guys, to be alive is a very precious thing. It goes in line with the gratitude. Don't forget how amazing you are. Don't minimize your own experience. Don't ever doubt for 1 minute how important you are. You are a spark of the divine, and you can be, do, or have anything that you want. I always say the only obstacles that I have are the limitations and the limiting beliefs that I place on myself. And as you get older, there is much that you are taught and conditioned that you have to unlearn. That's a big thing in life, is unlearning many things in order to unearth your own full potential. But as you grow into your own possibility, as you grow into your own power, the possibilities are infinite. So lastly, wherever you go, go with all your heart. And always know that, dear younger self, that it is never too late to be who you might have been. And so if I could have just 1 more minute, Belle, I wanted to read an excerpt from a poem, which I do love. It's called Remember, Women. Remember, women, you were born, a life giver, a miracle creator, a magic maker. You were born with the heart of 1,000 mothers, open and fearless and sweet. You were born with the fire of queens and conquerors. A warrior's blood you bleed. You were born with the wisdom of the sages and the shamans. There is no wound that you cannot heal. You were born to be the teller of your own tale, and therefore before none should you ever kneel. You were born with an immeasurable soul, reaching out past infinity. You were born with passion, abandon, and to name your own destiny. So never forget you are woman, divine, and that you have been from the very start. Thank you so much for the honor of sharing with you.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much, Felicia. I mean, I'm overwhelmed. I started making notes, and at some point I was like, oh, wow. Thank you so much. And maybe for our audience, I'm just gonna pick out on a few points that you raised, and I specifically use specific words to pin them out. For example, the one that stood out for me was the question of integrity. So the quality of just being honest and having that conviction to stay strong morally, especially in the world of business that we operate in. And also just the conviction to believe in yourself and to be okay with who you are. You spoke very eloquently about understanding your why. And for me, this is your purpose. As a woman, you need to understand your purpose. And it is only when you understand your purpose that you'll be able to have impact. And it is your purpose that will carry you forward when you need to stretch yourself with the examples that you gave around having to go back with solutions. So, and I think as women, we need to understand that curveballs will always be thrown our way, personally, corporate-wise, in every environment. It is our how that will make sure and will carry us beyond those obstacles. The second point that we talk about is about rejection. You know, we all know, especially in corporate, even in society as women, we find ourselves in a situation where we have to prove ourselves, even in this day and age, to make sure that we are better than, or can, or are able to run a family, be a mother, be a sister, and be everything else. And rejection comes as the first thing, which she managed. You know, she's a young lady, she's still gonna have a family. We can't afford a chief, you know, being off for 6 months because they have to go on maternity leave. So rejection is the order of the day. And it is up to us as women to now step up and see what do we put in place? What do we do? Which shoulders of which giants do we stand on to challenge that? I also liked the point you pointed out about ego, which basically talks about titles. And it is because of the culture of rejection that women are constantly faced with, that we find ourselves thinking, maybe if I have a certain title, they will listen to me. Maybe if I have a certain title, I will progress. And I think it is the mind shift that we need to actually impart into the future woman. You spoke about mentorship. This is something very, very personal to me, because I feel that not only are we our worst critic as women, and it is so difficult to find another woman willingly and wanting to say, let me show you, let me lead you through the steps that I've taken, you know, and you see it very prevalent in corporate these days, where you hardly find somebody being mentored in the same company, because then all of a sudden we regard each other as competition. You'd find that, you know, a woman from company A would rather mentor a woman from company B. And I'm saying, no, let's just call it out and say, what is the reason? And are we challenged that much? Are we doubting ourselves that much that within our own spaces, we don't even want to open doors for each other? The last part, before I call on our next speaker, is the issue of self-care. Self-care is important. We as women have been made guilty for over the years to take care of ourselves. And the description of self-care, it is something that I think even research in this day and age hasn't quite pinned it down, because we don't quite understand ourselves what self-care means. Does it mean going to lie at a spa? Does it mean just doing what I want? Lying at home in my pajamas with a cup of coffee? What does self-care mean? And I think it goes back to the point that you made at the very beginning of integrity, of knowing yourself, your why. What is self-care to you? We need to get out of that box, I feel, from your message today, where we live according to standards that are prescribed by society that don't serve us. On that note, thank you so much. And in the interest of time, our dear guests, I'm going to request that for this session, we limit for ourselves for questions on the chat box. Should there be questions that Vidisha, you feel very strongly, or we feel very strongly as the IRMSA team at the end, and when time allows, we'll probably attend to them. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Pat. Much appreciated.
On that note, ladies, I wish I could say beautiful ladies and see all of you. You know, we miss those days when we could still interact in that way. Our next speaker is Mandy Winner. I think Mandy does not need any introduction. She's an award-winning investigative journalist and author of multiple books, who has been reporting on crime in South Africa for almost over 2 decades now. One Tragic Night, the Oscar Pistorius murder trial, is one of the books she co-authored. Her book, Killing Cabal, an Underworld Exposed, which exposed South Africa's underground world, basically, is South Africa's phenomenal publication. I think it sold over more than 80,000 copies to date. She will be sharing with us on how to build towards a future and look into South Africa in terms of tomorrow and the future. On that note, the mic is yours, Ms. Rina.
Pat, thank you so much. It's absolutely fantastic to be here. Thank you for having me. And Videsh, I do just want to say that so much of what you have just said has resonated with me. I'm ready to throw my talk out of the window and just talk about work-life balance and the myth of work-life balance. You know, it's something that I feel so passionate about because it is a myth that we all try and achieve as women, how we martyr ourselves. And I really needed to hear what you said today. So thank you so much for that. I'd love to engage with you further. I think that a lot of people really found that resonated with them today. That was not the topic I was given. So I'm gonna jump into what I'm talking about today. But I think that we have to also view this topic through the lens of what we just heard about from Videsha and the impact of women and mentorship and our ability to lead, because obviously women play an enormous role in the future of South Africa. So listen, it's a hugely difficult time to give this talk today, right? Because we're all feeling like it's been very complicated in the last couple of weeks in South Africa. It's a difficult time to be an optimist in South Africa. If you look at what happened with the unrest and the looting and the protests, if you look at what's happening with corruption, the latest revelations from Daily Maverick around digital vibes and William Kize, the pace of the vaccine rollout, the ongoing corruption, crime levels, it's easy to fall into the trap of feeling really negative about South Africa and our future. I keep hearing people having these conversations around their plan Bs and what they're going to do and the slippery slope in South Africa. And you can feel like you can be overwhelmed by the situation, like the unrest can get out of control, our economy is shrinking, that unemployment is so high. And when you see the visuals of what we've been seeing over the last little while, it really is tough to find that optimism. But I still remain optimistic and patriotic, and some people may say that it is a Pollyanna view on South Africa, that it is naivety. I can assure you I'm probably the last person in South Africa right now to be naive, because I deal with it on the front line. I am absolutely aware of what is happening on a daily basis. You know, every day on radio I do 10 interviews with people about what is happening on the ground in South Africa. So my view is not a naive one, but I do bring you optimism. And when you look at the visual that all of us saw in that one, I hate the word family meeting, but that one address from the president where he was speaking about the unrest, where you literally saw people breaking into the blood bank on the little window on the screen while he was talking about addressing the unrest and the looting. We literally saw people looting a blood bank. And I think that one visual has stayed with us. It's kind of that indelible image of what was happening. And I think that also drove people's negativity and that sense of feeling overwhelmed. And you couple that with the fact that we know that Jacob Zuma was the spark that lit the unrest, that there are these great mythical instigators that we still don't know about who apparently drove the unrest, but it was poverty that really drove the unrest. The spark may have been Zuma, but the real fire and the firelighters was poverty in South Africa. If you look at the NIDSCRAM results that have come out in their surveys, the number of hungry people in South Africa, it was almost an inevitability if you look at the impact of lockdown and the pandemic, and the fact that we saw people looting grocery stores for food. And I think that's, we have to acknowledge what happened, what drove this, what went wrong. And we can't just brush it over and say everything's going to be great in South Africa, the future is rosy. We need to really truly appreciate and acknowledge what went wrong so that we ensure that it doesn't happen again. And that is important when we are looking at this through the context of making a difference, stepping up, as is the theme today, and making sure that we don't see these kinds of images again. So if you look at South Africa, you take a step back at the moment, and it's a very difficult time at the moment to be looking at this. You look at the inequality, you look at poverty in South Africa, you look at the GDP, you look at the situation around social grants, around crime, it's easy to conclude that South Africa is a failed state. But my argument is that it depends on which data you're looking at. It depends on how you are actually interpreting what is happening at the moment. There is a different set of data that you could be looking at. You could look at the fact that since 1994, our crime rate the murder rate has halved. Our HIV rate has halved. We have the largest antiretroviral rollout in South Africa. We have 7 million more homeowners in South Africa. Our vaccine rollout at the moment is within a couple of weeks, according to Adrian Gore. I heard him speak the other day from Discovery, saying it may be amongst one of the largest rollouts in the world. We could reach as much as 500 to 600,000 people a day. So it does depend on what kind of statistics you look at and which data set you're actually looking at. And there are definitely good news stories and optimism and green shoots, as people love to call them, in South Africa. But unfortunately, what's happening at the moment is that we are so driven by fear. And as Videsha said, you can't lead from a position of fear. You have to lead from a position of love. And when we look at the situation that's happening in South Africa, and remember, journalists only give you the bad news, hey? We have the saying in journalism which says, if it bleeds, it leads, but if it's good, it should. We're far more inclined to tell you about the really bad stuff that's happening. And when you get so occupied by fear, there's no room for the facts. So you don't look at what is actually happening. And I'm very much in the business of facts and making sure that we are delivering honest reporting and truthful reporting and making sure that people get the news in a way that is truthful, that is not driven by fear, because that's what clouds us. That is what overwhelms us, so that we feel like there's no path through the haze, and that there's just no way for us to look into the future because we are so bogged down in the negativity of what's happening right now. So as I said, it's important for us to understand where we are coming from and what we have been through. And the fact that we are currently in a situation as a country where we are rebuilding. As we heard from Shamila Batoy, who is the National Director of Public Prosecutions, it's very much like fixing an airplane while it is in flight. And you need to appreciate that the country was captured. And over a period of a decade, we saw a very intentional campaign to eviscerate state agencies. We saw law enforcement agencies being hollowed out, a huge amount of capacity leaving the NPA and SARS and the Hawks, state-owned entities going to the private sector, which left a completely depleted civil service. So those entities that we are now looking to, the NPA and SARS and the SIU, are in a process of rebuilding. And I don't think people fully appreciate just how bad this was. And if you look at state-owned entities from Denel to Eskom to Transnet to PRASA, all of them were so badly looted and so badly eviscerated that we just are not able to fully comprehend the damage that has been done, and we're paying for that now. And effectively, there was a shadow state that was set up, a parallel state by what some people call the G-Force, the Guptas, where we had this parallel state that was very much allied to Jacob Zuma running the country. So if you look at what's happened over the last couple of weeks with our intelligence agencies, we didn't have intelligence about what was going to happen. There was a complete failure of intelligence around what was happening in the country because of the fact that the SSA, the State Security Agency, had become a service to Jacob Zuma in this shadow state. And we are paying the price for that today. And that is the rebuilding process that we are currently going through. And the very fact that, according to the Daily Maverick, state capture cost us 1.5 trillion rand. That has huge knock-on effects. As an example, on our ability to pay out social grants, our ability to procure vaccines early, as rich nations have done. All of that has an impact on the cost-cutting exercise that Tito Mboweni has to do on expenditure in other departments. And that's why we find ourselves in the position that we're in and why we are now paying the price for it. So if you watch the state capture inquiry at the moment, which is like the soap opera of South Africa, for me, it's better than Legacy or Generations or whatever else you're Scandal, whatever else you're watching, because you actually cannot make this stuff up. You know, I always say series 27 of South Africa is wild. It's a movie, and we are all the extras in this movie because you really can't make this stuff up at the moment. But sunshine is the best disinfectant. And the fact that we have got people coming to the state capture inquiry and testifying about what was happening there, laying it all bare, telling us exactly about the capture of the state, who was paid off, who went into Saxon World and walked out with brown leather bags full of cash and tog bags in their boots. We need to hear that because it is cathartic for us, and we need to get it all out there so that we can deal with it. And remember, what we're also hearing about is what happened, you know, a good 5 years or so now. And there has been a lot of change since then. But we need to go into that horror story and watch it. It's like War of the Worlds, and sit there and dissect everything and see the worst of it, to look at that cancer so we know what we need to take out so that we can move forward to the future. So there's a lot of negativity for us to focus on, and it's easy to be sucked into this negativity, but I prefer to try and move the focus onto what I call the hope dealers in South Africa. And if we saw anything with the protests and the unrest, it is our ability as South Africans to be resilient, to have a can-do attitude, to step up and to make a difference. And there are so many South Africans, so many of them women, that I like to talk about because they really bring the hope. These are active civil servants, people who are just doing their jobs, people, regular South Africans like you and me who just choose to make a difference. There is the judiciary, there are the Chapter 9 organizations, the whistleblowers, which I've written a book about because they absolutely need to be celebrated and appreciated. The media, and those are some of the people that I really want to put a focus on because they don't get enough attention and there's not enough positivity around them to encourage them to do what they are doing. So if you look at every single failure in South Africa of leadership, every time there has been a vacuum in leadership, it has always been civil society that has stepped up and has filled that void. And I can give you countless examples of this. If you look at Black Sash with Life Esedimeni and social grants, Section 27, the Helen Suzman Foundation, Freedom Under Law, KSAC, you have all of these organizations that are stepping up every time there is a breach of leadership, every time our constitution is undermined and there is a failure in democracy. It is civil society organizations. Just today, I was looking, the Constitutional Court is handing down a judgment on Muslim marriage rights, and it is the Women's Legal Service that is driving that. So there's always civil society that steps up. And a perfect example of this is what happened during the unrest, about how civil society stepped up and made sure that they helped to rebuild and supported South Africans. Just look at Gift of the Givers. I laugh at people who say Imtiaz Suleiman should just run for the president. You know, the Helen Suzman Foundation didn't, the Helen Joseph Hess Hospital in Joburg didn't have water for weeks. So the Gift of the Givers just rocked up, dug a borehole, put a borehole in, and gave them water. And that is the ability of civil society to really make a difference and to step into the breach and make sure that the center holds in South Africa. And then, of course, the judiciary. So what people often fail to acknowledge about the last couple of weeks is that the rule of law and the constitution in South Africa has held firm. Former President Jacob Zuma is currently in prison in escort. How many of you thought you would ever see the day that that would happen? And when you heard Judge Sisi Kampepe hand down that judgment in the Constitutional Court, that powerful, emotive, eloquent judgment where she spoke about the Constitution and the duty of judges to the Constitution, I've never felt prouder as a South African, because that is what underlies everything for us in South Africa. Is our constitution. It is the most phenomenal constitution. The Freedom Charter in itself is unbelievable. And the very fact that the rule of law in South Africa has held over the last few weeks. There was no state of emergency. If you go and read the article about the female police officer who convinced Jacob Zuma to hand himself over. And yes, 300 people died. We absolutely cannot discount that and the trauma of that and the loss of their families, but it could have been so much worse. There could have been a full-on coup and bloodshed outside in Nkandla. At the end of the day, it was all bluster. And Jacob Zuma was taken into custody and is now serving time in the escort prison. And that was because he did not respect the Constitution. Remember, he has not gone to prison for corruption. He has gone there for not respecting the Constitution and being in contempt of court. And people tend to lose sight of that, the fact that that has held, and the rule of law in South Africa has held over the last few weeks, and you cannot discount that at all. And Justice Sisi Kampepe, who was the acting Chief Justice at the time when she handed down that judgment, is just the embodiment of that and her dedication as well. And then you have just good people who are doing their jobs, people who are doing what is required of them in the Constitution and in their jobs. So someone like Advocate Thuli Madonsela, who as the public protector spoke truth to power, who in the face of personal attacks and criticism was willing to author and put her name on the state of capture report and really speak out without any kind of fear of retribution and make sure that our politicians were held to account. It's just another example of good people, good South Africans who held the line, who did what they needed to do to make sure that justice prevailed. And we wouldn't be where we are today if it wasn't for the media. The Gupta leaks in themselves brought down a presidency. I chatted to Peter Louis Myburg on radio yesterday, who's now exposing William Kize. He told me that the stuff that he revealed yesterday, the SIU hasn't actually got to yet. And you cannot say enough about investigative journalists in South Africa and the work that they are doing to make sure that politicians are held to account. The late Mandy Rousseau, who was a good friend of mine, we would not know about Nkandla today if it wasn't for her and her curiosity. Videsha spoke earlier about just being curious and having insatiable curiosity, and Mandy was the personification of this. She went to do a story about Nkandla, a fairly innocuous story, and she saw that there was building happening, and she started to ask questions. And she very quickly realized that what was going on in Nkandla was not right, that there was this huge compound that was being built for the president, Jacob Zuma, and she did the first expose in the Mail and Guardian about Nkandla. And we wouldn't know about it today if it wasn't for Mandy Rousseau. And that's why it's so important for the media to be appreciated. And we are very lucky in South Africa. We have absolute freedom as the media. We have some of the most robust media in South Africa, with investigative journalism and our ability to speak out and to hold power to account. Something I'm very passionate about are the whistleblowers that we've seen stepping up over the past few years. As I said, I wrote a book about it called The Whistleblowers, and I can't speak about this enough. You have South Africans who are patriots, who have put everything on the line. Many of them, interestingly, are women, or they are the sons of single, strong women. And many of them were in very comfortable positions. They saw that something was going wrong. They felt that they needed to talk up, and they did. And as a result of what they've done, state capture has been exposed. So look at someone like Bianca Goodson here with her daughter, Chloe. Bianca was working at Anglo. She had a very comfortable job. She had a multi-million rand salary. Her life was cruising along. She got an offer to go work at Trillian. She was there for 3 months, and she realized that Trillian and McKinsey and Eskom, the entire setup was shady, and Trillian was effectively being paid money to do nothing on behalf of a Gupta-owned company. And she blew the whistle ultimately. It took her a little while to come forward. As a result of her blowing the whistle, 1.6 billion rand has been returned to the fiscus. She has made her entire computer available. She testified in Parliament. She's been to the Zondo Commission. She is a true whistleblower in every sense of the word, yet she is unemployed and unemployable. She has sent out over 2,000 CVs. She has had to cash out her pension. She started a Back a Buddy campaign to try and raise money. She has PTSD. On her own admission, she'll tell you that she drinks too much and that she really suffers the emotional trauma of what has happened to her as a whistleblower. And that just cannot be in South Africa. In fact, she wrote a letter to the president, an open letter saying, we have to change in South Africa. We need a societal revolution in how we treat whistleblowers in South Africa, because we cannot fight corruption if we are going to treat these whistleblowers as pariahs, as impimpies, if we push them to the fringes of society, if we don't give them national orders and appoint them to the boards of companies. And that's why we need to appreciate them. And there are so many whistleblowers, Masilo Motepo, Suzanne Daniels, Themba Maseko, so many of them have come forward, Cynthia Stimple at SAA, to make sure that they are doing this for the country, so that state capture is exposed, corruption is exposed, and they are driven by morality, by ethics, by doing the right thing. And they are the kind of people that are changing the country's narrative. You know, all of these people that I've spoken about, just good patriotic citizens who are looking at what's happening and saying, no, not on my watch. We're going to change the country's narrative, because it is very easy, as I said, to be cynical, to be negative, to complain. I talk about bad news stories on a daily basis, but a lot of it is about perception. It is about our outlook, and it is about the narrative that we want to pursue as South Africans. And the only way to do that is if we become active South Africans and active citizens ourselves. And what struck all of us after the looting and the unrest was how quickly South Africa pushed back. Within a few days, South Africans were pushing back. We saw taxi drivers protecting our malls. We saw private security companies making sure that people were protected. And then we saw just good South Africans going to help to clean up, picking up a broom and starting to sweep and supporting people in any way that they could. The Rebuild SA Facebook page just exploded, and we saw thousands and thousands of people volunteering their service. And this is the resilience of South Africa, that we were willing to say, no, we're not going to allow this unrest to happen. We are not going to allow all of this negativity. We're going to push back. And one of my favorite quotes, my friend Brent Lindeque, the Good Things guy, loves to refer to this quote, is, in times of tragedy, always look for the helpers. And Fred Rogers always used to say this. He used to say to his mother, well, look at all the negativity, look at all the trouble. And she would always say to him, look for the helpers. And there were so many helpers who were willing to step up, to protect, to rebuild, and to really, really make a difference as well. And I think that's important to focus on, is our resilience and our willingness as South Africans to hold the line. And there are lots of other positives to focus on too, in terms of looking to the future. In one sense, I know that I've said on an IRMSA platform before that what the unrest has taught us is that we're on our own. We can't rely on government. But that's not entirely true. I think that what we've also seen happening is the public-private partnerships developing that are going to lead us into the future. So if you look at the vaccine rollout as an example of what's happening, where we've seen private entities stepping up and coming to the party, really helping with the vaccine rollout, making sure that we are seeing those numbers rise, where we are reaching a point now. I think today it's at 8 million people that have been vaccinated. We do have a surplus of vaccines now, and we're seeing these private-public partnerships really picking up and making sure that there is a difference, because there needs to be this cooperation between government and between the private sector as well, who are going to look to the future and really make a difference. If you look at SAA now, that has entered into a public-private partnership as well, in the hope of recovering the airline and making a difference. That clearly is the plan for the future and the path for ensuring that we do grow as South Africans. I can also tell you unequivocally that we are starting to see a turnaround in state-owned entities, in the state capture that we saw as well. There is a real shift happening in terms of rebuilding. At the NPA, we are starting to see arrests taking place. Remember, Ace Makashule has been pushed out. He has been, he's had to step aside within the ANC. He is currently charged before the courts. Jacob Zuma is now on trial for corruption. The NPA is rebuilding. We are going to see a lot more prosecutions. They have to wait for the evidence to be finalized before the Zondo Commission, before they can prosecute some people. So there are a lot of people who are going to be facing charges in the not too distant future. So that is happening. SARS is rebuilding. That entire rogue unit that we lost because of state capture, SARS under Ed Kiswetter has begun to rebuild. We are starting to improve the country's purse because of the rebuilding of SARS. That is happening at the moment. Eskom is slowly improving. It may not feel like it with load shedding, but it is starting to rebuild, starting to recover. Madupi is now finally finished. We had that big announcement from the president around energy. So there are positive things that are absolutely happening. We are starting to see the turnaround. Things take a long time with President Ramaphosa. He likes to consult, he likes to mull over decisions, but there are positives. We were invited to the G7 this year, which is a huge acknowledgement for us as South Africans. So if you look for them, the positives are there and things are starting to shift. And you know it as well as I do, South Africa is always a roller coaster for us. It is the kind of place where one day we despair and the next day we hope. And that's what we have. So we had a situation in South Africa where there was all of this misery, and then all of a sudden we won the Rugby World Cup and everyone felt so much better about it, where we saw the rebuilding. And then we see Tatiana Schoenmaker winning a gold medal, and we all feel fantastic about being South Africans and being patriotic again. So this is the country that we live in. There are going to be these negatives and these disasters that happen, but we are always going to push back against it, and we will learn from our failures in rebuilding and looking forward towards the future. And I'm confident that our future is positive, and that we are on a process of recovery, that we're on the verge of a big thing. And always in our past, it's out of the turmoil, it's out of the disasters that we have always built into something better as South Africans. So it's very much for me about having perspective. It's very easy to focus on the negatives, on the unrest and the corruption and the looting and the slow rollout of the pandemic, but try and have a look at those positive aspects as well. And a lot of it comes down to us as individuals and how we choose to make a difference. And I look at people who like to complain, who sit back and are armchair activists on Twitter and bitch and moan about the country and say that they want to leave and it's a disaster, we're becoming the next Zimbabwe, and they want to get out of here and immigrate. But if you are going to stay in South Africa, then make a difference and do something about it. And there's a lot of things you can do to become an active citizen. Just vote, for one. You can give up your time or your expertise to a civil society organization. You can mentor, you can grow people, you can make a difference in your own world, in your own organizations, in making sure that there is a legacy for the future, and just be an active citizen. So get out there, get involved, write to your councillor, phone into radio stations, hold politicians to account, because the only way that you're going to make a difference is by sticking up your hand and actually fighting for this country. Because I do believe that South Africa is a country worth fighting for. So thank you so much. I haven't even had a chance to look if there are any questions, but Pat, if there is anything, I'm happy to take it.
You know, Mandy, every time I listen to you, I'm really amazed by your bravery. It really knows no measure, no boundaries. And you know, listening to you speak today, I thought to myself, you know, you bring journalism, law, and political sciences affinities to life. You know, you make me want to go back to my younger self and say, okay, no, finance is the wrong way, go this other way. And it is quite amazing. And to our audience today, I really would like to say, I mean, we've been presented with these facts that we've seen. And from a business perspective, I think we can draw many lessons to them. Mandy, you mentioned at the very beginning around it's how you interpret the current situation. You know, there's a Nigerian author, Chimamanda Adichie, and she's got a publication around the danger of a single story.
Yes.
And as you were talking, I could see flashes of that from all the slides that you were presenting. And then I thought to myself, hang on, she's got a point. It boils down to the individual because it is at the core as an individual in terms of how, you know, all these movements are formed, which eventually affects and influences the culture and the strategies and so forth of our country. And if we take it to the personal as well, in terms of how we lead ourselves as women, you look at the physical, the mental, the emotional, and the spiritual. It is only through that the social movements that we're talking about are able to be formed, because as a person, somebody stepped up and said, you know what, enough is enough. We cannot have this anymore. We can't have this anymore. So when they were grounded like that as an individual, and then they were able to influence teams, and teams that were able to form movements, and movements that we see them affecting our countries. And I would like to challenge our audience today to do the same thing in their own individual lives, to bring it back to a micro perspective, where now as a person, because you know, we tend to think if I'm not Wendy Winner, I'm not going to be able to, you know, make impact in society. What we forget is that it starts with that one individual, where in your own personal capacity, you start to look at yourself, to reflect, to understand your why, and then you have that conviction to actually carry it out. And then when you do carry it out, the impact you have and the drive that will come out of that, for you to actually think, hang on, I'm going to start a movement, whether a movement in your family to say, listen, I'm not going to tolerate this mother-in-law anymore, or I'm not going to tolerate my boss anymore. You know, it will drive that conviction. And then when you start now pulling together the forces, and all I'm going to say to that, it all has to be pegged on the purpose. You have to understand what purpose is it going to have at the end. And that's legacy matters that we're talking about. It's legacy as a person at micro and macro level. Thank you for that. We've got a few minutes. I will take probably one or two questions before we let Mandy off. If you could maybe just show by raise of hands, because there are so many comments on the chat box, basically all complimentary to you, and really everybody is in awe of you. I mean, when Mandy speaks, you sit down and you listen. You pull out your camp chair, you listen. You know. So by show of hands, I'll take one or two questions. It can be even a comment if necessary. It does not have to be a comment. I'll read probably one or two in the meantime. Mulaya says, thank you, Mandy. You brought so much hope, and we can make change if we stand up together. And I think that is what basically the message that we're hoping to deliver. You brought us hope, and then we know that journalism, somebody has to pay the bills at some point. So, but then we need really, really be careful to the perspective that we look at things and we appreciate things. Thank you so much. We really appreciate you. Dear guests, on that note, we're going to give LexisNexis just 2 minutes sponsor time. Grab your teas, grab your coffee, sit down, and then from there, I will introduce you to our next powerhouse. Thank you so much. Welcome back, everyone. And now this I think is going to be my favorite slot of the day, because I'll tell you why. And this has got nothing to me trying to date myself and everything, but then this powerhouse. I tell you, I remember when I grew up in one of the townships in the south of Joburg, and every weekend, you know, there'll be that Jabulane, you know, playing down the road. I mean, really, it was one of those times where I feel that the ills of society and COVID-19 is stolen from us. I'm going to introduce to you our South African music legend, PJ Powers, fondly known as Thandeka. In fact, when I say this takes me back to my younger self, I really mean it. I mean, that's all. The minute I saw that her name, all I could hear in my head was Jabulani. And I remember, you know, there used to be, well, I come from the Val, Miss PJ, and there used to be, you know, like a mini boardroom thing that used to happen. I can't even know what it used to be called at the Val grounds in Verena thing. And it was a thing. You get there early and you leave late because she's going to be the open item and the closing item. But she's more than that, you know. I mean, PJ has been recognized for her contribution in the music industry with 12 gold discs, 4 platinums, and a gold CD. And some of the highlights of her career is the Award for Peace and Reconciliation, the Bull and Bear Award by the JC, the SOS Humanitarian Award. The list goes on and on and on and on. And she's going to be leading us today on diversity. Over to you, PJ.
Wow, how does one follow that opening? And I do like the fact, Pat, that I took you back to your younger days. I think I take everyone back to the younger days. I've been around for so long. Hi, everyone. Wow, I am so aware. I've always been a fan of Mandy Wiener, and I was reminded today what an incredible person and what a fantastic ambassador for our fabulous country. I am very happy to be here today and to share with you the how risk has played a part throughout my life and my career. I knew from a very young age what I wanted to do. I was one of those lucky people that knew from a young age what I wanted to do when I grew up. And at the age of 5, I had decided that what I would be was a famous singer. Now, I don't just mean a singer, I mean a famous singer. And I had this wonderful dream and this wonderful vision of myself that I used to walk around with a little tape recorder and a microphone, and I used to ask my older sister to please interview me. And the reason she was interviewing me was because in my head, I was already a world famous singer, and she was incredibly patient. She really was. And I'm sure there were times that she wanted to chase me away, but she continued to ask the long list of questions that I furnished her with for years. As I progressed in life and grew up and you know, went to senior school, and my family were convinced that this desire to be a singer was going to pass. They thought it was a passing phase. It was my hobby. I was playing guitar and singing for everyone and anyone who would listen. You know, some people get paid to sing. I think as a young girl, my mum used to pay me to stop singing, and I surprised them because in my matric year, when my dad called me into his study and he said to me, "What do you want to do at university?" I said to him very abruptly, "I'm not going to university." Well, that caused much dissension in the family because I came from a privileged upbringing, and what happens in my kind of family, what happened in my kind of family was that you went to school and then you went to university because to deny an education was a sin. And but I just said no, and it caused huge rumblings. And you know, my dad, after much tears and arguing and a lot of raised voices, he said to me, "Okay, I'll support this decision of yours to become a singer, but I want you to do me a favor. To which I, said, well, okay, what would that be? And he said, will you work for a year before you embark on this career that you want to take? Which, of course, I was 17 and I was in a hell of a hurry. I don't know where I thought I was going so young, but I was in a hurry to put back my plans, whatever plans I thought I did have. But I said to him, okay, I'll do that, but then you find me a job, which he did. He called his bank manager and he said, listen, I've got this wayward daughter who I really need to put the reins on, and will you employ her? And he said, yes, okay, I'll employ her. And I arrived at the bank, Barclays Bank, in Natal and 320 West Street. I remember this clearly, walking in and being put into ledgers. And I don't think anyone needs a description to know that ledgers is just not, it's not the kind of job I wanted anyway. And it was way before computers, and there were ledgers. The ledgers, you stood with a pile of checks like this, and you put the different checks, you check sorted into different pigeonholes. And of course, everybody else, the three other girls that were standing around this pigeonhole sort of place to sort the checks, they were taking their time and saying, 2001 and then 1998, number 6. Not me, I looked like a sort of blackjack dealer at a hotel. I was just like plop, 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 plop. And consequently, I messed up the whole of ledgers. And eventually, after 2 months, Mr. Griffiths was his name. I'm surprising myself with my memory today. Mr. Griffiths called my father and said, listen, we can't do this. We can't have your daughter here in ledgers. We cannot. It's not going to work. And so I was fired from my first and only formal job. And I do remember getting a payslip, which was, I don't know whether you still get these payslips you obviously don't see these computerized now, but you used to rip it open and then you would see your salary. And I remember that my first salary, I was minus 65 Rand. I'd gone into overdraft. I knew nothing about this field. I was gone into overdraft in my first salary, which I think is quite a claim to fame. But because I was writing out checks willy-nilly. So I was asked to leave the bank politely. They did ask me politely, and I went out and put cardboard into different shops all around, music shops, saying singer looking for a job. Now, I just want to tell you that for me to call myself a singer in those days was really, really cheeky, because I had only sung in church and in the school plays. I had no experience. I'd never sung through a microphone. So it was really, it was very cheeky of me. But eventually the phone at home rang, and somebody had gone into a music shop and seen this and phoned my parents' home. And I was offered to go and audition with an all-girl band. And I went in and I auditioned and I got the job. And I was the youngest. I think everybody else was in their 20s, and I sort of waddled in. And when I mean waddled, I waddled in. I was quite a stoodler. I was not a small youngster. And I waddled in and I got the job. And we entered a talent contest and we won. And from that day, things changed. I moved up to Johannesburg for one, to the big city. And I think much to my family's sadness and despair, they saw me drive off in a red Ford Escort. I didn't have a license. There were 5 of us in one car with all that we had, and we drove to Josie to a job, because that's what we'd won. It was a 3-month residency at the Hyde Park Hotel. That didn't go well at all, because despite the fact that we thought we were fantastic, we were really, really bad. We were just awful. And we got fired from there, which left me, sort of up the creek without a paddle, because I had nothing to fall back on. I had no backup plan. I had no learned skills. Talk about risk. It was an enormous risk that I had taken to not get something in educational wise, to fall back on. So I do remember that when we had done the talent contest, there was a talent scout who came up and gave me his card and said, if you ever find yourself in a pickle, I believe that you have great talent, phone me. And my sister actually said to me, why don't you call that guy who came up to you at the talent show? And I phoned him. And at the age of 17, I signed, well, I didn't sign, my father signed. I like that, no risk, no reward. At the age of 17, my father signed my first record deal, which was incredibly lucky. And I know how lucky I was now, because I've watched people wait years and years and years. However, I didn't have any experience, but I had written songs from a young age. I had started writing, and eventually what happened was I recorded a song, which was a simple love story, rock ballad called You're So Good to Me. And in 1983, I got a phone call, well, not me, my management got a phone call to say, would I perform in Soweto? And you must understand that when my manager said this to me, I said, well, why? I had no idea. I had no frame of reference, nothing. And he said, because you've charted on the Radio Zulu, which is now Ukhozi FM charts. Now, I just want to take you, well, you can't take you back, you're probably all too young, but in 1983, South Africa was a very, very different country. Even what we heard on the airwaves was segregated. Radio Zulu played isiZulu, Radio Xhosa played isiXhosa. It was just, and Afrikaners played Afrikaans, and the English, we were just, I don't know, cribbing everyone as usual. And I got such a shock, because here were two DJs, VVO in Kansas City, who had taken an enormous risk, a risk to their safety in the apartheid regime, and decided that they were going to play this English rock ballad love song. And it got to the top of the Ukhozi FM charts in 1983. And I arrived at Jabulani Amphitheatre, which is where the concert was. 5 white people. We looked shocking. We looked like, I looked like a Zulu version of Desperately Seeking Susan. I had just grabbed any beads that I had, any bright colors, what I assumed that people would like to see me in, and went onto the stage. And I remember 30,000 people singing along to You're So Good to Me. And that was my first soft landing, I must be honest. Here I was in 1983 on the 31st of May, which was Republic Day in those days, as a white girl in the middle of Soweto. And it was the first time I felt safe. It was the first time I felt that I could. I wasn't being judged. I was being listened to. I was being heard, and I was being celebrated. And it was amazing. It really, really was. And I remember Collins Mashego was the compere, and he ran on stage and he's saying, today we are going to marry this woman, this girl, to Soweto. What should we call her? And it was that day at the Jabulani Amphitheatre in 1983 that I got the name Thandeka, which is not a nickname. It is my name that Black people in this country call me. I love it. I am incredibly proud of it. It is in my passport, and it's something that has just been my Grammy, that has gone through, that I've thought about whenever I'm feeling disturbed and down, and when I've been feeling, and I've been through a lot, which I'll get to. It's always this story and this that happened to me. that reminds me of just how incredibly lucky and incredibly loved I am. And this, of course, I drove out of the Jabulani Amphitheatre, and the band and we knew that our lives had changed forever. The trajectory of my life did a completely 180-degree turn, and I was being celebrated and loved, and I was performing to 30, 40, 50,000 people every weekend in different townships all over the country, and my career just grew. It was incredible. So too was the risk that I had taken, because without thinking of it and without realizing, obviously, that this would happen, I had whatever white fans I had, most of them turned against me, and the regime hated me. They thought that I was a traitor. They called me a traitor. I was a marked person, and I was, the country was a political hotbed, and for years, I looked over my shoulder. I had bricks thrown through my window. It was a battle, but one that I would do all over again to reach where we are right now, which some of us, as Mandy was saying, may not think is so good, but it's just in terms of the vote and in terms of who is in power. And I remember thinking to myself, well, a lot of people have asked me the question in Q&As of whether or not I was scared. And the truth is I wasn't. I wasn't scared because I knew that the decisions I was making in my life, whilst they were risky and they were full of, there was a lot of emotional stuff. I had nothing to bounce off. There was nothing. This was brand new. It had been the first time. I had no mentor. Because it was the first time this had happened. So there was nobody to guide me. And I just went on. What I still believe today is I don't listen with my ears. I listen with my gut. My stomach tells me everything that I need to know. And I've tried to go ahead with that. I've gone against it, and it's really, really messed up every single time. But I've tried to be true to myself and to my gut. My career sailed along, bumped along, should we say, but it was glorious. And eventually in 1990, I went to Zimbabwe, and I did a concert for the children on the front line, which I suppose at the time was quite provocative. But for me, I was asked to do a concert for children orphaned by South Africa's border wall policies, because, we just used to march into any other country and do what we liked. And, I just thought that it was the right thing to do. Well, little did I realize that the enormity of that action of mine and going to Zimbabwe, because I got back to South Africa and I was banned. And, it was quite something. I was terrified because I couldn't be heard on the radio. I was persona non grata, so they took my voice away. They took I wasn't allowed to be heard on radio. I wasn't allowed to be seen on television. And for an artist, that is death. I mean, that's the lifeblood of what my career is being heard and being seen, and was and still is. But I was, and it was scary. But what I did was I decided the only way that I was going to have people not forget me, because despite this being a wonderful industry, it's also a very fickle industry, and to stay relevant is difficult because out of sight, out of mind does in fact exist. So I upped my live performance, and Pat talks about those days in Vereniging and all over the country. I upped my live performances to a crazy, crazy schedule. I was doing 3 shows over the weekend, 3 shows on a Saturday. I was flying to 2 different, in private jets, I was flying to, or planes, not jets, to 2 concerts. I just upped it to a ridiculous, ridiculous regime. And I wasn't forgotten. And I, to this day, have South Africa, I love you because you have never made me feel forgotten. And my biggest fear is being forgotten. And my fear for other people is that they are forgotten. But I digress. Over this time, it was very difficult, but I had one fairly important fan, which I didn't know that I had. But this news of this banning order had by then filtered through to Nelson Mandela while he was still incarcerated. And of course, he was getting some newspapers and some television footage in 1990 that, there were rumblings of his release had begun. And he wrote me from prison saying a great letter, very newsy and fantastic and inquiring about my family and what I was doing. And in the end, he said to me, whatever you do, do not give up. And I remember feeling battered, but with a letter like that in my pocket, I had all I needed to propel me further and to not be bullied by these people. So Madiba was released and our democracy was born, which was exciting and wonderful. And so too was, we did the Rugby World Cup, and I got to be invited or chosen by Nelson Mandela to, together with Ladies with Black Mambazo, perform at the 1995 World Cup. And that gave me an incredible leg up. I mean, my career just was never, ever the same. It just took off and it stayed there. And but I ran the risk then of thinking to myself and being advised by other people saying, am I becoming overexposed? Am I going to inadvertently become South Africa's unofficial rugby mascot? Which, I started to realize that I was becoming synonymous with just rugby. So I was fortunate in that my career had grown in the rest of Africa and enormously in East Africa. And I went on a tour of Rwanda and Uganda and Kenya, Malawi, all around Botswana, South Africa, closer to Zambia. And I stayed out of the sort of live performance arena here, and also just took time to write new material and to ground myself after having this enormous success. I am telling you, like a journalist, all the good news. I mean, they tell the bad news. I'm unlike a journalist. I'm not telling you all the punctuations of disastrous things that have happened to me in the last 40 years. So I was writing material. I released a new album in 2000 and sort of early 2000s. And then in 2010, talk about being born under a lucky star, I was phoned and told that the 2010 Soccer World Cup had decided, which was being held in South Africa, they had decided to call the official board, Jabulani. So with that, it was, I mean, what are the chances? And I was in the studio recording with HP, and we did a remake of Jabulani, and that just catapulted me into the future. It was, however, another big sporting event, and some of the things that the press said about me was were not so fantastic. So I became a Brand South Africa ambassador in 2018, and I started a speaking career, which I must confess was an enormous risk for me, because I really was unconvinced that people wanted to hear anything that I had to say. But I've realized that my voice is important, and I value it enormously. And I've realized that everyone has a story, that my place is not just to stand up and sing, that I have a place to tell my story. And I urge everyone sitting in this webinar and everyone listening to always tell your story authentically and so how have I negotiated the risk over in my career? I have avoided comfort zones. I think that you run the risk of becoming completely irrelevant when you are unchallenged and you hide from scrutiny. And I like to call it paradigm paralyzed. If you're in a comfort zone, you run the risk of becoming, as I say, paradigm paralyzed. I'd like to end off and close off with a couple of questions that I ask myself when I'm feeling when I'm feeling insecure, which, believe me, is a lot of the time. Am I stuck in my life? And if any of these, actually, if any of you say yes to any of these, then address it. Am I stuck in my life? Are my fears blocking my way forward? Do I doubt my own ability? Do I suffer from low self-esteem and confidence? Yep. Am I biased towards people who are different from me? Do I tend to avoid confrontation, and do I hold back my opinion for fear that other people will not agree with it? Does my ego stand in my way, and do I tend to guard myself from showing my weaknesses? Do I become defensive when criticized? And I've learned that we do not learn when we are speaking. We learn when we are listening. And I'd like to say bye and thank you for a wonderful career and for all the support, and end off by saying, have the courage to be enough, and have the courage to face your fears, but most of all, and most importantly, have the courage to find your joy. Thank you.
PJ, we thank Mr. Griffith for letting you go. I'm telling you, I think there would have been a big void in the South African music industry had he insisted that will probably make you a receptionist. Maybe just answer the call because you've got a beautiful voice. Maybe he could have just said, okay, I'll get her to just answer the calls because we can't have this blackjack ninja roaming around in our firm. And we thank him. I wish I knew him. I wish I knew his grave. I'll just say thank you. Just burn a candle there and say thank you. And you know, you picked out so many things that I was struggling to actually pin it down to a few points that I wanted to share and summarize it with our audience. Because through just simple relation of your history and how you became the powerhouse that you are, the many things that came out of your story, but the two that really stood out for me was diversity and inclusion. And when I thought of it, I thought, this the quality of actually having the conviction to be included, to bring in and to accept, and to be one of without fear, irrespective of the dangers. And I would like to emphasize at all costs, the conviction to include, the conviction to ensure that everybody plays a bigger role in the society or within your interests or without fear at all costs. And this is something that I think we lack very much in society today, where if I'm not going to benefit from it, why must I get involved? I mean, on Instagram, on Twitter, on Facebook, there's a famous going, if it doesn't pay your bills, you know, don't care about it. And I think this is where one of the social decays that we have right now. We've got many examples still of, in this day and age, of examples that are trying to undermine the progress we've made in that space, not just as individuals, but then as a community in the space of diversity and inclusion. But because we seem to be accepting of the current status quo, or now probably maybe the bigger majority of us from what it was in the 1980s have progressed to the level of comfort zones, do not want to challenge. And you were bringing all these elements in your talk. I'm thinking, we are comfortable. The people sitting around this table are people that understand what a summit to Women in Risk is all about. And they're able to take and can afford to take 2-3 hours out of their time to sit around the table. They are comfortable in that space, in their own right. Then what happens outside this in terms of inclusion and diversity becomes, I've got already too much on my plate. I shouldn't be involved. What difference is it going to make to me? I'm here already, I've arrived. I'm at the table. And it is wrong, because on the one hand, we are pushing for progression, but then we need to be very conscious and careful not to make that progression decay our social morals and values of Ubuntu, of who we're supposed to be. And this is what I see happening. This is what I've picked up from your conversation.
Yeah.
And I'd like to challenge everybody on this call this morning that maybe we need to go back to a point where we interrogate ourselves and we read and recognize the triggers in us that makes us accept why it's okay to allow agendas that undermine diversity and inclusion to continue. All of us sitting around this table are professionals. All of us sitting around this table come from communities and backgrounds where this is our daily bread. But then we choose to allow it. Why? Do we not believe in ourselves enough that we've got the power in us to drive it? Or have we been elevated to a point where we feel it's not for me? There are lots of social movements in South Africa that will deal with that. I get my paycheck, I get my business going. I don't want to mess up my brand reputation with those type of things. Thank you for planting the seed. Good audience, please interrogate yourself, understand your triggers, and maybe I'm going to challenge you that in the next 12 months, decide what are you going to do about those triggers? Are you going to just ignore them? Or are you going to choose to step up and play a part in changing this country to be what we envision? Because a lot of things that we have in this country are on paper. We need to implement. We cannot implement if you and I don't step up. Thank you so much, PJ. Our
Thank you.
Thank you so
very
much. On that note, dear women, we're going to move to our next speaker. Miss Latina Johnston, she's on our screens already. And she will be advising us on how to step up the risk function in an ever-changing world of risk, and what risk has left behind. Ms. Johnston has over 20 years of experience, and her portfolio ranges from non-financial risk functions to risk chief executive roles. She's currently the chief risk officer at FNB since 2017. Over to you, Ms. Johnston.
Thank you so much, Pat, for the introduction. And I would like to thank IRMSA for the opportunity to share this platform this morning with, I think, some great speakers. I've had the privilege to listen to a few of the speakers, but unfortunately not everyone. And I must be honest, I was actually so excited to see PJ Powers. I mean, one of my favorites as well. And I've taken the quote that she shared with us: we learn when we are listening. So I think that I'll definitely take that back with me. I'm going to share my screen. So if you could just give me 2 seconds to do that. And if I can just check if you can see my screen.
We can see your screen, Latanya.
Thank you so much. So I think what's amazing about the theme of this conference, and when it was shared with me to step up, I actually, what resonates with me is that as risk professionals on the call, and having been in risk management for many years, one of the things I've always tried to articulate is that risk management should not be seen as a support function, but truly as an enabler of an organization's ability to achieve its objectives. And I think what's great about the theme around stepping up is we should step up as risk management and as risk professionals and truly own our rightful seats at the relevant tables. And on that note, I thought what's appropriate in order for a function to be able to step up is truly to understand the environment within which we operate. So what I firstly would like to start off by just saying is that many of the people on the call this morning would know that there are major trends, mega waves, and internal pressures that have driven the need for change in various organizations. These waves really span from the identification of new business models. We all know and are aware of fintechs, but it's also been driven by the change in consumer behavior. And we are all consumers on the call this morning, as well as the ever increasing need for big data and what we are currently seeing, which is we are in the midst and in the heart of the fourth industrial revolution. But what's also important for me just to articulate around why it's important as risk professionals to understand the changing environment within which we are enabling businesses to achieve their objectives is that there is a paper written by the Boston Consulting Group, and it really refers to what they call the new battleground for organizations. And what it really says is that in order to survive, we must truly create relevant solutions for customers and people. We need to extract substantially greater value from data and analytics, and we need to start reaching beyond traditional borders. But I think what's also important, and linking back to some of the great conversations we've had this morning around the environment within which we operate, gender-based violence, diversity challenges, etc., is that what's also becoming very important is that the societal and environmental expectations are becoming the dominant topics of the day. And I think it's important as risk that we understand how we enable these conversations, how we drive courageous conversations to challenge some of the existing issues we have, whether it's around transformation in business, transformation in risk, whether it is around climate change and how we expect our organizations to show up to truly make a conscious difference in the society within which we exist is important for us to step up. And that's why I think it's important to understand these concepts. What's also important is that in the midst of this fourth industrial revolution that we are in, one that has been spoken about for years, I think what's also important to understand is that the world that we're operating in is starting to be characterized by a lot of new technologies. We talk about robotics, we talk about AI, we talk about the Internet of Things, we talk about the existence of autonomous vehicles. But we only need to look at the screen that I'm showing, or the slide I'm showing you now, to truly understand how the dynamics are and have been changing. If you look at this here, what I'm showing you is really just the top 5 publicly traded companies by market cap between 2001 to 2020. And what it articulates here is that in 2001, the stage was really owned by energy and banking type entities. By 2016 already, we didn't see a single bank or energy company really making it to the top 5. So what has been happening is that the environment is now starting to move to what is called platform-driven organizations. And it's important that as a risk function, we truly start understanding what that means. So in terms of the next slide, I thought it's important just to give you some context around what is a platform ecosystem. Firstly, understanding a platform ecosystem requires you to understand the players within a platform and how they are becoming more critical and crucial in this conversation. Now, let me first explain to you what a platform ecosystem is. And the best way to explain it is through Apple. So what you have is you've got for example, the producers of products and services like Apple, and then you have your buyers and your users. And I'm sure many of us on the call here are iPhone users. So we know that in order for you truly to find benefit out of using your iPhone, you have to buy quite a few apps. And what Apple has done very successfully is they've created this platform ecosystem. And it really has been focusing on an outside-in view. So truly understanding the consumers with whom you interact and who you provide services to, and then being able to connect consumers and producers in a frictionless environment. Now you might ask, okay, but what is the relevance of this? If the world in which we're operating is changing from what we are used to, which has been a product-driven environment where lots of products are forced on people, to really this platform ecosystem where it is about understanding your consumers' needs, it is about understanding and creating trusted interactions. What does that truly mean for risk management? And I think the key thing to understand is that the way in which we show up and step up as risk professionals needs to change and needs to become, I think, a lot more edgy and relevant to truly make sure that we are key enablers in this changing environment within which we operate. Recently, PwC actually issued a paper on risk management 2025 and really focusing on industry priorities and what is called and the transformation agenda. And I thought just important to just reflect on the risk functions perspective on what we see as the largest threats. And this is now for the banking industry, but I'm sure you could have a look at what it means for various other industries. And what I thought is quite interesting here is that you are seeing that risk functions and professions are really starting to identify threats that resonate with the mega trends and the waves that I had articulated up front. But I think what's important for me also is that we need to understand that the changing business models and something that's becoming a lot more important, we are all customers on this call, is that the customer relationship is becoming a lot more critical for organizations to survive in the future. So really, what does this mean for risk management? I think the first thing I want to articulate is that the role of risk management is to help our organizations to respond to current and emerging challenges. And this is best done proactively, firstly, but you need to be able to understand both the potential upside and downside risks. And I think if you just reflect on everything we've heard this morning, from the first speaker to the speaker around what's happening in society, to some of the conversations around diversity and transformation, managing risk today is not easy. I think the last 17 months, having had to navigate the impacts of COVID-19, which had an impact on health, had an impact on society, had an impact on businesses, the economy, but also had a personal impact on, I'm sure, everyone on the call who has either been infected or affected by COVID-19, is that now more than ever, risk management and risk professionals have been required to step up and truly be able to help navigate some of these very uncertain times. So when you think about all of that, I think the first thing is I see risk management, like I said, not as a support function, but as an enabling pillar in an organization. And it's important for me that as risk professionals and as owners or leaders of risk functions, that we see this risk as a business and that we start considering how we show up in the context of how a business would set out its own strategic objectives. And as such, I've just articulated here that if you truly want to step up as a risk management fraternity, these are the key strategic objectives that I believe are important for us to focus on. So firstly, and I think many of you on the call would agree with me, that culture in many of the issues that we've seen in I think South Africa, in big organizations, you can always relate it back to a poor culture. And I think now more than ever, we need strong leadership to create purposeful cultures. We need to create environments where it is not just about driving revenue and profit or bottom line at the expense of other very important issues like societal good and better societal outcomes, transformational outcomes, environmental and societal shifts. So what's important is no risk management will ever be effective without the right risk culture. The second thing to understand is that processes aren't enough. When I reflect, and I think many of you, when you read up on the massive scandals that we currently see, and you actually just, I think, deep dive into some of the key root cause issues, you would find that they had the greatest risk processes, they had the right governance structures. But the fact of the matter is, it was about those fundamental beliefs and the individual mindsets that impacted how decisions were actually being made. So really, the attached slide here was taken from the FCA's Transforming Culture in Financial Services paper that was issued in 2018. And what is important here is that when we are trying to influence the changing culture, when we want to try and influence the behavior we would like to see in our organizations, and I think this is again one of those call to actions for risk managers and for risk professionals, is we need to step up and we need to drive the culture which we wish to see in our organizations. And we must be able to make sure that we help create an environment that fosters the ability for people to speak up. That we create an environment where it is not only important to speak up, when something's gone wrong, but it's also important for people to be able to speak up when they've made mistakes. And I think that is where the risk function really will play a much better role in the future. And it's also like Pat was saying earlier on, when we see things that are happening that do not align to our values and our morals, then we should actually be speaking up, because by being quiet and silent, you're implicitly agreeing and supporting. And I think that's an important thing that we as a risk fraternity need to drive. The next thing that I think is important is around what the future risk professional skill set needs to look like. And I'm sure that, and I know that IRMSA as well is doing a lot of work around understanding how we equip and drive, I think, contextual training solutions for risk professionals. But what I've added here is two parts for me. The first one is, if we as risk would like to be seen as a key enabler in an ever-changing world, we have to reflect and consider what does that mean for our skill sets. How do we drive and I think try to pursue the right skill set that allows us to maintain the seats that we need to have at the table. And I've just articulated on the slide here that it's everything from lifelong learning to being able to deal with complexity, also being able to understand business strategy and have the right business acumen. But the thing that I'm very passionate about, even in my own organization, is around diversity. And I'm so grateful that that was also a topic on the table this morning, is that we have to drive diversity within our risk functions as well. And I think for me, what's important around diversity is that it is not just diversity in terms of race and gender, but it is also diversity in terms of thinking, diversity in terms of skill sets. And it's important that I think going forward that in the risk professional space, we actually truly drive the various initiatives that enables that. The one thing that I found quite interesting is that I looked up the USB report of women in business recently. And what it states is that women make up 51% of the South African population currently, but only 20.7% of directors of JSE listed companies. I think it's clear to say that we still have a long way to go in terms of creating, I think, or equalizing the gender imbalances in top tier of our business leadership. And I think we need to make sure that if we've got influence over how we set up our risk functions, that we need to start there. And then through that, we can really drive the change we wish to see in our organization. But for me, diversity within our risk professional functions is something that I think is quite important for us to continue to drive. The next important, I think, factor to consider if you truly want to step up as a risk function in 2021 is that we need to embrace the strategic technology trends that we are seeing. I sometimes find that as risk functions, we seem to think that these trends impact business, but not us. Now, again, I want to say risk as a business needs to be able to adapt. And what I've articulated here is just in order for us to be able to enhance how we look at risk in this very, I think, complex environment within which we operate with so many different challenges on a daily basis. We have great opportunities to enhance our risk tools and our techniques. And what I've just articulated on this slide are key points that I think any CRO on the call or risk head would like to consider when you take back into enhancing your own risk management processes. Firstly is that we need to drive automated risk management processes through workflow case management, which I'm sure we do already. The thing that I think COVID-19 taught me is that while as risk professionals, stress testing and scenario analysis is a core part of risk decisioning, our ability to do dynamic stress testing and scenario analysis with the input of data is currently something that we're not that great at. I'm speaking for myself. I don't know what the other areas are like. But if you think about using Intel, like we've just gone through a process of riots and protests in South Africa and consequent looting, how robust was our scenario analysis processes to be able to dynamically assess the impact of what we were seeing? The other thing is that machine learning and AI should really start becoming a key supplement of risk skills. This is currently, I think, a growing trend within the risk management fraternity, and we see it playing out a lot in certain type of risk types, but I think it's something we truly have to embrace. And what's important here is another change management topic is that we should not see the implementation of AI and machine learning as a threat to our ability to manage risk, but rather as a supplementary, I think, skill set that helps us to better manage risk. I think then the last three that I'll just put them together in the interest of time is that risk in itself needs to be on a platform journey. We truly also need to understand the users and the producers of our risk management services within the context of an ecosystem. And that is truly enabled through the right technology and really utilizing data and analytics to enable greater risk management. So let me touch a little bit on data. Something that I think everyone must be tired of hearing, because everything you talk about now, data is the next big thing. Data is the oil that we need across a lot of our organizations and especially industries as well. But I think what I'd like to just articulate is that the combination of a sustained exponential increase in computing power, I've touched on AI and machine learning already, which has lasted for 120 years, I think 60 years since the Gordon Moore's article, and close to exponential increase in data generation along with algorithmic improvement really is what we need to truly enable us to do better risk management in the future. And I think what I've just put on the table here is that there are quite a few use cases already where the utilization of data and analytics can help us to better manage risk. One, in terms of better data inputs and data insights and the ability to create data assets. But secondly, also the ability through the use of AI and machine learning in combination with data to get much more efficient as risk management, I think, professionals and functions. What's also important is that the use of data analytics, I think, has been used in the financial risk space for many years, and I think probably very well embedded in that space. But in the non-financial risks is where there are great opportunities for us to start embedding this type of thinking and to be able to truly make sure that we move the needle and that we change the way we look at risk management. The last slide I wanted to just quickly share with you is the fact that it's amazing when you are in risk management, there is constant evolution of the risks that we deal with. And there are many emerging risks that many of the risk professionals on the call would already be thinking about. But I think just important to note that these are all going to be important as we continue to navigate, I think, one, this 1-in-100-year event we are dealing with, which is COVID-19, but two, at the same time, not to lose sight that there are other changes that are happening and impacting our organizations. So for us, it's important that as risk professionals and as risk management functions, that we are not caught off guard by these big trends that will have a huge implication on how our organizations respond. And back to my initial point at the start is, as an enabling function, we should already be thinking strategically about our response strategies. And then I'd just like to end off with this quote, which I thought was very opportune, thinking about how I thought about COVID-19 and the challenges we've been experiencing over the last, I think, 17 months. And it's from The Lord of the Rings, and it basically just says, "I wish it need not have happened in my time," said Frodo. So do I, said Gandalf. "And so do all who live to see such times. But that is not for them to decide. All we have to decide is what to do with the time that is given us." Thank you so much for this opportunity.
There you are. I almost got cut off there, Lynette, and I was like, what's going on? Thank you so much for bringing that energy to this conversation. And I think we are all working hard, and we are all envisioning a world where risk management becomes embedded into the fabric of all functions across all sectors. And at the beginning of your presentation, you spoke of the drivers of change that are actually what is driving the risk management practice. And I mean, there were like 7 drivers, I think, that you pointed out. But then what stood out for me the most, which I think is even more relevant to what we're trying to commemorate this month, it is the one about trusted interactions, because that talks to partnerships, whether on an individual level or whether on a strategic alliance. And the reality of life is that we always gravitate towards people who share the same beliefs and the same morals and the same everything with us. And the way that technology has pivoted how we do things today, it is kind of like thinned our ability as human beings to have that feel of energy and understanding. That's, I think, risk management, we are able to go into organizations and you're able to feel the atmosphere and the energy in that atmosphere around questions and the way body language and so forth. So now having to do risk management on a screen, kind of like, has put a filter into one of the very things that enables us as risk practitioners. And it brings me then to a point of then partnerships then becomes very important, because then you will partner with those, whether it be a business or individual, where you share the same ethical and moral standing. And it is the beginning of how we then influence cultures around risk management. If F&B goes and partners with Lexis, as an example, and they've got the same shared vision, the same shared culture around people, because we seem to think of culture as, being capitalist, where, monetary companies just want to go out there and make money. But then culture right now, in terms of where the world has been moving from human resources practice and it's about the people. The people are the ones that actually form the culture, influence the culture of the business. And if we start capitalizing on culture, I think on partnerships, we will work smarter, we'll associate ourselves with people that share our same views, and then we stand a better chance on influencing their risk management practice.
Completely agree.
Thank you so much for your presentations. I'm hoping that my audience is also taking those insights that I took from this. Very insightful. There was more detail I can't contain that. And we thank you for this. We've got a few minutes, so I'm not sure if maybe by raise of hands, if anybody wants to take, because I know we've got, all our audience is really very much the risk enthusiasts. They probably were waiting for your shot to take a jab at it. So I've got time. So by show of hands, anybody that wants to maybe ask Ms. Johnston questions or maybe commentary.
Pat, there are some great questions in the Q&A for
Do you want to
Latonia.
take a jab of them, Valerie? Then Ms. Johnston can answer those, maybe.
Should I just answer them in the chat? Very comfortable to do that as well.
I think maybe
Latonia,
Valerie, for good order, maybe just highlight them to Ms. Johnston so she's not fishing, because I see there's like over 100 comments.
yes,
Just for good order, maybe
course.
just point out the main ones, and then she can interact with those specific individuals verbally this way.
Of course. So Michelle says, she fully agrees that risk management should be integrated and ingrained in the culture of an organization. So how do we challenge this as a risk in itself?
Yeah, and I think it starts with the tone from the top, because whenever you need to address the ability to make sure that risk management is seen as integrated into your business processes rather as an afterthought. And having been in risk for so many years, I know what it's like when risk is not seen as a true business partner. I think what's important as a risk fraternity is really to start with the tone from the top. And then once the tone from the top is appropriately set, it allows the tone within the organization to change. And that is really, therefore, for you to really get your risk function to be integrated, it is about a cultural change. It is a cultural mindset change. And as Pat has also said now, it's important to differentiate between a climate in an organization and a culture. And it's important to make sure that the actual individual beliefs and mindsets are adjusted to truly understand how risk can enable an organization. I think we also just have to remember that sometimes the departure point for risk managers is actually seen as policemen, seen as just raising issues, but what we must do is we must also change our approach, because when you are able to understand both the downside and the opportunity, and you are able to, through your business acumen, be able to provide, I think, recommendations around appropriate solutions, your true value add comes to the fore. And I think it's about changing how you're seen in that construct, and it's about being able to say, but I'm actually here to enable the business, I'm here to partner.
Thank you, Latanya. Over to you, Pat. There are no other questions, just some great comments. One from Vilna about, we are getting stuck with the big data skills, and think there is more foundation skills that is needed in organizations, as you've shown on your slides. But I think that's it from the questions. Thank you, Pat.
If I can maybe just add, Valerie, to that, I think we all face the same challenges, because big data is the next big strategic thing. What we've done as a risk fraternity is actually start with basic data literacy training for all our risk professionals. And we think that has helped to at least lift the understanding around data. The thing that's important is risk professionals do not need to become the next data scientist or data engineers, but you need to at least have insight into what it can do and what the value is you can get from creating data assets. So that will also be another recommendation I can pass on. Thank you so much, Pat, for the opportunity, and thanks to IRMSA.
Thank you so much, Latanya. We really appreciate your time and great insights there. Thank you so much. Without further ado, I'm going to move on to Dr. Adriana Murray to close off this very informative session. Dr. Murray is a South African theoretical physicist, technologist, and advocate for off-world exploration. She's a director of the Foundation for Space Development Africa, an organization aiming to send Africa's first mission to the moon, the Africa to Moon Project. Adriana is a researcher at heart, with a passion for topics from quantum physics. Just reading this, it just makes my head soar, Adriana. From physics to philosophy of science, photosynthesis, bio-inspired technologies and so forth, origins of life and so forth. Her PhD and research in quantum biology on photosynthesis and the origins of building blocks on the Life in Space won awards from the L'Oreal, UNESCO, and the Royal Society of the South Africa, amongst others. She's currently completing a book on how the voyage to Mars will evolve Earth, describing how through technology advancements and an enhanced perspective of reality and our planet in it, living on Mars will enable us to become better stewards of Earth and equip us for the beginning of our journey into the stars. Over to you, Dr. Murray.
Thanks so much, Pat. It's a pleasure to be here with everyone this morning. Let me share my screen and begin. So let's take a broad perspective and change the focus slightly to one on space, which I haven't heard being raised yet, but perhaps it fits very well into the topics, because this is one of the riskiest endeavors that humanity is currently embarking on, and has been doing so since the explosion of exploration in the Apollo era. But I would argue that we are currently underway in another explosion of activity in space. And yes, it is a risky business, but currently things on Earth are not looking that unrisky either. So what insights can we gain from space exploration, and why should we care? So let's begin. I do have a background in quantum physics, as Pat mentioned. So I thought we'd kick off with a bit of quantum molecular dynamics of the coronavirus molecule, because this will be important for the test at the end, especially equation 1.27. I'm kidding. While this molecule has occupied a lot of our attention for the last couple of years, this is not going to be the focus of my talk today. So some of the themes I will be talking about now are themes that I've been thinking about since high school. This is me on the right in 1997 with my project for the Science Expo with my friend Sarah, called Life on Mars. And we were thinking about power, air, water, food, city life, and how a community on Mars may survive and thrive as a community. So since then, as my mom has pointed out, not much has changed because I'm still thinking about those categories, and we'll get to those in a moment. But first, let me give a brief overview of the activity that we've seen on Mars and in space in literally the last 2 years. So while a lot of industries have been brought to a halt during the economic lockdowns associated with the pandemic, the space industry has been all systems go. So a huge congratulations to China for becoming the first country in the first attempt to send a mission to Mars. So they are currently in orbit around Mars, as well as their rover successfully roving on the surface of Mars and sending back beautiful footage. So huge congrats to the Chinese, who've now become the second successful country to send a rover to Mars. So the Tianwen-1 joins the Perseverance rover and the Curiosity rover, which are currently active. Another huge congratulations to the UAE. And their mission has indeed inspired the whole Middle East region with hope. This is also the first attempt of the UAE to send a mission to Mars, and their mission is currently in orbit, the HOPE mission. Congratulations. So we've seen the US in their 9th successful landing on Mars with the Perseverance rover. Excitingly, also on board was the helicopter, the Ingenuity helicopter. So we've now seen the first drone basically flying on Mars, and this is the first powered flight beyond Earth ever. So huge congrats to the team at NASA JPL for that success. A bit closer to home, and those are all this year, by the way. A bit closer to home, we're seeing a revival in moon exploration activity. And I'm not going to focus too much on the billionaires who've in fact not quite reached space in spite of the marketing, but have flown pretty high up in the sky. That's Richard Branson from Virgin Galactic, as well as Jeff Bezos from Blue Origin. So the US has recently passed new regulations such that they are not in fact astronauts. They didn't go high enough up, but these private companies' activities in space are in preparation for this revival in moon exploration activity, and in preparation for the private sector to be playing a large role where perhaps government agencies have dominated in the past. So I'll show you this range of countries that's involved to really say, you know, regions around the world are participating in space exploration in a way that hasn't been possible before the 21st century. And what role is Africa playing in all this? And a lot of people might think, you know, what role does Africa have in the space industry? I would be horrified at such thoughts because, you know, every time we swipe a card, we use a satellite. Every time we navigate home, we use the GPS system, which is satellite enabled. So it's a very old-fashioned viewpoint. I would say that we should be buying the kind of technology that comes out of space from other countries. We should be developing it, we should be celebrating it, and we should be participating. And as such, at the Foundation for Space Development Africa, where I'm a director, we are planning Africa's first mission to the moon, the Africa to Moon project, where we aim to put a radio telescope on the far side of the moon, because the radio signals there don't permeate through the Earth's atmosphere. So we'll be able to do new science, looking at new signals on the far side of the moon. If we are successful, we are currently expanding our collaborations and have some very exciting developments there. And in the next few years, hopefully we will see Africa gearing up to land technology on the moon. And the idea of putting a radio telescope on the moon might sound familiar to some of you, because I'm sure you're aware that the biggest science collaboration project on the planet currently, which is the Square Kilometre Array Radio Telescope project, is currently under construction in the Northern Cape, right here in South Africa, along with other locations in Africa and also Australia. The Meerkat is a precursor to the SKA. It's a range of 64 dishes, I think it is, which is already doing amazing science, detecting new galaxies, new phenomena, and enabling us to look deeper than ever before into the universe in which we find ourselves. So that was a brief recap on the kind of news events in space, in case you've been following other types of news, which I think we all have, of the doom and gloom of the current era. Taking a broader perspective and thinking about things from the perspective of beyond Earth can be an exciting way to think about solutions to challenges that we have here on Earth. So let me bring this back down to Earth slightly and try to relate more directly what I mean when I say our activities and endeavors in space can help us to learn important lessons that will help us to solve challenges here on Earth. So I think there's one thing that we can say with certainty, and that's that things are not going to get less extreme here on Earth. Our population continues to grow. This means our industry that supports this population growth is continuing to disrupt habitats. There's a mass species extinction that we are in the midst of. This mass species extinction event is correlated with the climate change events, which result in extreme weather and the increased probability of pandemics. These are all related factors due to human activities. So if we agree that things are looking rather extreme on Earth and they may stay that way, then space is a great place to practice being more resource efficient, because at the heart of it, that's what we're going to need to do. We are going to need to learn to use our resources more wisely, whatever planet we're on. And the extreme environments on the Moon and Mars, and even in the space station, are a great testing ground for the kinds of technologies that we will need. So let me give some examples. In the space station, we have seen massive contributions to the development of solar power technologies. We've seen massive contributions to the development of wastewater management systems. We've seen contributions to LED lighting, for example, which is useful for growing plants indoors, as well as communication systems and various other aspects of robotics and nanotechnology that will be essential if we are going to harness technology to use our resources more wisely so that we can work towards a positive future on Earth and perhaps beyond. So in 2019, when the Mars One project declared bankruptcy, you might know that I was one of the 100 astronaut candidates selected from around the world with that project, which unfortunately didn't raise the funding to get to Mars. But this is by no means an indication that this endeavor is not going to happen. Startups don't succeed in raising funding all the time. So I decided in 2019, this is far too important a project to give up because of funding issues. And so I established the organization Proudly Human, with our endeavor of collecting data in some of the harshest environments on Earth. That includes desert regions, many in Africa, the Sahara, the Namib, in the Middle East. These kind of terrains can teach us to manage water more efficiently, which I don't need to convince you is an important skill and technology to develop if we are to look towards a positive future, whether we're thinking about Earth or beyond. Water management. Next is living under the ocean, and this is tricky but also exciting for missions to moons of Europa and Saturn. We believe there are oceans underneath their icy crusts, and missions to these moons that penetrate below this ice and investigate the ocean underneath may reveal evidence of life. So living under the ocean is a good comparison to being in space, because of course the air is not breathable down there. You've got to manage your own pressurized habitat, and that's some of the endeavors that we'll do when living under the ocean. In Antarctica, this is probably the closest analog that we have on Earth to the kinds of conditions that we see on Mars, for example, because the temperatures in winter in Antarctica reach -60, -70 degrees Celsius, which is conveniently around the average temperature on Mars, -60, -70. Also, Antarctica is the most isolated place on Earth. So even the space station is less isolated than Antarctica, because evacuation out of the space station can be achieved within 24 hours. While during the winter months in Antarctica, which is around 9 to 10 months of the year, there is no possible way to leave Antarctica and no possible way to bring additional supplies, for example. So that's just a quick overview of some of the regions where we plan to collect data to prepare for life on the Moon, Mars, and beyond, but also to demonstrate the human resilience, the sustainable technologies, and the community spirit that will be necessary to survive increasingly extreme conditions on Earth. We need to manage our resources better. So there's the videos, I'll play the video in a moment. So what kind of considerations do we have? Power. We have the sun shining in all parts of the solar system, so solar power will still be a good way to generate power for a community, whether we're looking at Earth or beyond. This is Matt Damon in the movie The Martian, but that's kind of the fundamental requirements to set up the power systems necessary to sustain a community. And I don't need to convince you that reliable power is a challenge that we have yet to overcome here on Earth, and developing remote power systems is a great way to think about informal settlements, refugee camps, or even overcrowded urban centers, or indeed communities living beyond Earth. Water. This is not Mars now. This is a picture of how Mars may have looked around 4 billion years ago. So yes, Mars did once have oceans. And that's why all of these countries are so interested in exploring the surface of Mars, because if there was water, there may have been life, and we may find remnants of this life in the form of fossils on the surface, if we are able to send technology to have a look. Finding evidence of life on Mars would be the most profound contribution to our understanding of who we are as humans. To know that there was life on the next door neighbor planet means that life is probably way more abundant in the solar system and perhaps in the universe than we may have thought. But managing water as we leave Earth, we live in luxury here with 71% of the planet covered by liquid water. But as we enter increasingly difficult climate conditions, for example, in Madagascar and Southern Africa in general, a lack of rainfall or change in weather conditions may mean that managing our water becomes more critical than ever. A great place to learn to do this are in places like Mars, where there is currently no liquid water, to really test how efficient we can be. Food. This kind of system shouldn't look foreign to you. There are these kind of systems on Earth. And increasingly, if we are looking at food security for a population of 10 billion humans by 2050, this has got to be the way we're going to be producing food. The efficiency with which we can produce nutrition in this kind of setup exceeds that of traditional agriculture for some crops. 96% less water is used in systems like this because the water drips through and can be fed back into the system. You can, of course, use machine learning to regulate the conditions that are perfect for growing strawberries, for example, so that you can produce the most nutritious biomass in the least amount of time with the least amount of resources. And conveniently, you can grow this food close to where humans are living and reduce the needs for transportation. So I hope you're starting to see extreme parallels between what we need to think about when thinking about setting up camp on Mars and what we need to think about improving living conditions for people on Earth. Data. Again, I don't need to convince you how crucial data has been for us lucky enough to have had access to participating in global networks and our jobs and socially as well. Having internet and the ability to communicate with data and to do education with data, to learn, as well as to be shared information on a global level, has been enabled by our communication systems, and life on Mars will be no different. Data will be required for 3D printing, blueprints, software updates, communication back with Earth. Data has become almost important a resource as power, water, and food for a human living in the current era. I've left shelter for last, although perhaps that's the most fundamental requirement. And millions of South Africans live without adequate shelter, especially in these winter months. So how will thinking on Mars help people on Earth? Well, I think having an enclosed system like this helps us to keep track of resource consumption in ways that we have not yet done on Earth. On Earth, we live in open systems, people coming and going between countries, so it's very difficult to keep track of exactly, how many liters of water South Africans are drinking every day and how much of this water is lost in faulty piping, etc. So this kind of system will enable us to measure and study and create data and reach conclusions and solutions from looking at this data on how we can really optimize our resource utilization. The space station has been a great example of a kind of enclosed habitat where we can monitor such things, and a lot of learning has come out of that. But these kind of closed domes will give us fresh insights into just how much resources, one individual or one community of people would need. So better resource management systems will come out of that, I think. you know, gone is the illusion of infinite resources. There are not too many of us on this planet to live under that illusion. What we need to do is become much more efficient. And at the heart of that, I think, is to eliminate waste. There should be no such thing as waste. Every molecule can be utilized for some or other purpose. And living in closed systems and studying these things in detail can enable us to reimagine and repurpose waste in perhaps ways we hadn't thought of here on Earth. So here is the video. Sorry, let me just change the sound settings for a second. Give me a moment.
I want to go to Mars because, to me, the allure of the unknown has always felt far more powerful than the comfort of the known. Thank you for your attention.
Proudly Human's Off-World project is a series of habitation experiments in the most extreme environments on the planet to prepare for life on the Moon, Mars and beyond, and to improve standards of living on Earth. During each experiment of several months, a carefully selected team will arrive in an isolated location, build infrastructure from scratch, run projects, and live as a community while participating in making a documentary series. Do you have the right stuff? We are looking for resilient people with diverse expertise, a passion for adventure, and a story to tell. Apply now to join our off-world community.
When we allow ourselves to dream, when we believe in our dreams, and more importantly, when we take active steps towards achieving those dreams, that it becomes possible to create a proudly human future, whatever planet we're on. Thank you very much.
I hope the sound came through on that video correctly. So that was a call for volunteers for the Off-World project that I have told you about here. And let me leave you with these thoughts. I'm going to wrap up now. Maybe there's no way that you would consider traveling to Mars. Maybe Antarctica is a place you've always wanted to visit. Maybe you're a desert lover, or maybe living under the sea sounds exciting, or maybe this is just a thought experiment for you. But I think it has value even as a thought experiment. So whether you're going to apply for the Proudly Human Off-World project or not, I think it's valuable to consider, what would my project be for such a project? What would my contribution to a community in an extreme environment be if I were to apply for such a project? Would I be an engineer with my contributions to solar power or water management or food production? Would I be chefing and producing beautiful food from limited ingredients for people? Would I be an artist creating sculptures in the desert that can be visible from space? Would I be a mediator between conflicts that may emerge in the group? Would I be an instructor for the boxing classes that people might need at the end of the day? Would I lead the meditation sessions in the morning? But what are my skill sets? What are my passions? What are my abilities? And how could I think about creating a project proposal where I think every day how I could contribute to a community in an extreme environment? This will all be documented for the world to see, because I believe that the technologies that we will use, the solar power, the wastewater management systems, the food production, we're going to measure all of that and create massive amounts of data to show people just how efficient we can be with existing technologies towards getting to Mars, but towards a more sustainable, more resource efficient and a happier future here on Earth. Because let me remind you all, whether or not going to space is your cup of tea, we are already in space, right? We are hurtling around the sun. We are limited to a craft called Planet Earth, where all of our resources are currently sitting. We are on spaceship Earth, and we are not passengers here. We are crew. And it is crucial that we think about how we can contribute to this community in whatever way we can. And that's a bit of a message on the risks in space, but also the necessity for thinking about Earth from a broader perspective in order to create a future we can be proud of, whatever planet we're on. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Dr. Marais. Wow. Dear members, you've been challenged to come and play a part and contribute to a good cause. Go explore. Like she said, she's not sure if you'll be able to do your yoga there, but you know, Adriana, when you were talking, it is amazing that some of the things that we read about on, you know, from the current World Economic reports talks directly to what you're trying to prove and enable us to maybe even plug a gap in some of the socioeconomic issues that we have, things like living spaces where there's crowding in some areas and so forth. And I think for me is that this is where you see risk management coming into play, and how to play a big player in terms of sustainable environments, ESGs, where we help organizations to determine their material ESG metrics, and how to design and deploy appropriate responses, and to measure and control progress, thereby increasing ESG's performance over time, whilst we still, finding out, how long can we survive on Mars and so forth. And I think sustainable, strategic, sustainable risk management could probably enable companies to anticipate the direction of change by understanding the long-term vision, including compliance with sustainable principles, and to both avoid related threats. And I think for me, this brings me back to the point around how do we then, as risk practitioners and professionals, make sure that our practice is embedded in every sector, even futuristic thinking, because this is what it's about. It is about, can we stop thinking, looking backwards in terms of how do we become, how are we responsive, but rather how do we proactively, mitigate future risks or even contribute towards what the future could look like. I will stop here and open the floor for questions and comments, because I'm sure this is an interesting topic. I've seen comments on the chat box. Val, I'm not sure the specific ones that Dr. Murray hasn't covered. If maybe you'd like to take that.
Yes, thank you. I was just really interested in the comments and the questions, Dr. Murray. What an insightful presentation, just looking at science and innovation. So I think one of the key questions a couple of people have asked is, what legislation governs in space, on Mars, on the moon? What governance is there? As risk managers, obviously, that's a great question.
It's a great question, which has a very unsatisfactory answer. And basically, a lot of the legislation that does govern what happens in space is treaty-based. So back in 1967, when the US was anticipating landing people on the moon, which they did so in '69, they drew up the Outer Space Treaty. So treaties are not mandatory, and countries who have signed this treaty do include South Africa and many others, but not all countries have signed this treaty. So for example, if you launch from a country that has not signed this treaty, you can do whatever you want. And many of the activities that we see going on now in space have not been addressed in this treaty, which obviously, having been drafted in '67 for the first time, needs to be updated in a way that perhaps it hasn't. So I think let's start on the surface of Earth and go up. I think low Earth orbits is the first place where we have a huge problem with the lack of legislation in terms of space. We've seen more satellites launched in the first 3 months of this year than ever before. And we're now looking at, I think, below 10,000 different satellites that have been launched. But obviously, there's a limited volume of space up there. And we are going to see increasing collisions between these things, because when they break, they stay in orbit, and they may break up, and collisions cause more debris, and this can escalate. So perhaps not this year, perhaps not next year, but this is a problem we need to address. People need to be mandated to clear up their space junk, or they need to mandate someone else to do it. But currently this isn't in the legislation. So never mind the moon and Mars, this is just low Earth orbit. And I think we all know how important satellites are for our daily activities. When it comes to the moon, it looks like the commercialization of the moon is going ahead. So like it or not, the moon is close enough to Earth to kind of be included in its economy. So I find this shocking, but other people may find it normal or natural that capitalism will spread to the moon and people will dig stuff up there and keep it and sell it, whether on Earth or for use in space. Mars, however, is a nice, interesting point where it's far enough away that it's going to be very difficult to govern from Earth. So let me not go on endlessly. There are probably other questions, but if you're thinking, this is what some of us are also thinking. If we do want to change the way that we do things on Earth by demonstrating somewhere else the possibilities that could exist, Mars is a great place to do it. And I think, some of the players planning to get there are indeed hoping to implement new ways of building communities. and let me leave your
Thank you,
imagination.
Adriana. I think that kind of encompassed the big questions around it. That's it from the comments. Pat, if I can hand over back to you to wrap it up, but I think that encapsulated what everyone is thinking about.
Thanks, Valerie.
Thanks so much, Val. Thanks so much, everyone, Dr. Murray, PJ Powers, Linetia, all the speakers, Mandy. We really appreciate the time that you took this morning to really come share with us. And it is really being insightful. And I think our members walk away this morning with a broader perspective of, it's not just about managing risk in corporates and how our corporates dictates risk to us. It's broader, and I think we just need to step up and challenge that status quo that it's specific to our environment. Say, hang on, let us broaden our frameworks and look at how it's applicable in our own environment and how does it ultimately bring us to being a better society, better organizations, and better individuals. On that note, I'd like to thank you. I will end here. And Val, maybe just ask you just to go through any announcements specific to the organization, and I will be off the camera, and I thank you very much. Go well, dear members.
Thank you, Pat. And wow, how the morning has just flown with so many great speakers. Thank you to all of our speakers. And thank you to the IRMSA team who's put this event together. More importantly, thank you to our attendees. Thank you for joining us, for making the time to join this session, and wishing all the ladies, going into, I'm sure you might be taking a long weekend, which we are so looking forward to. We're wishing all of you a happy Women's Day coming up. And thank you to LexisNexis once again for partnering with us, for your support in enabling us to run such fantastic sessions, to be able to bring you thought leadership. To our members who've joined us, if you are claiming CPD, this is a CPD event. So these will be automatically loaded into your profile, but please do check. There are always a few gremlins sometimes in the tech space. So reach out to us, let us know. And we so look forward to seeing you soon and engaging with you. Thank you, everyone. Have a fantastic day.